53 years ago, a 3-year-old boy vanished from his front yard on a quiet morning in Springfield, Missouri, disappearing without a trace and leaving a family shattered in despair that would last for decades. Authorities suspected a strange man who had been seen around the neighborhood was involved, but with no vehicle located, no direct witnesses, and far too few leads to pursue, the investigation eventually stalled. Yet through all those years, the older sister who witnessed the moment her little brother disappeared never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile memory that the boy was still alive somewhere. Then one day, when a DNA sample was uploaded to a civilian database, a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked for half a century suddenly lit up, changing the entire case and shocking everyone involved in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe. Missouri in 1972 still had the feel of a peaceful Midwest, where small towns like Springfield ran on community trust, front doors were often left unlocked, and children played in yards without much worry about crime. In that setting, the Ward family lived in a quiet residential area on the edge of town. Daniel Ward, 32, a carpenter at the local mill. Mary Ward, 27, working part-time at a bakery. 6-year-old daughter Emily, about to start first grade, and 3-year-old Jacob, the energetic youngest child, who had just started speaking in full sentences. The family had a regular daily routine. Daniel usually fixed things around the house in the morning. Mary prepared breakfast and did laundry. Emily sat on the front steps doodling, and Jacob ran around the front yard with simple toys. Life had been uneventful for months, except that for about the past week, a light blue Ford pickup had occasionally appeared in the neighborhood at irregular hours. A few times the truck drove very slowly along the wooden fence of the Ward house. But since Springfield was a place where many independent workers came and went to buy materials, this was not considered unusual. The morning of June 23, 1972, began like any other. Daniel was busy fixing the back door hinges. Mary was making pancakes in the kitchen. Emily was sitting near the front steps, and Jacob was running back and forth near the gate with his toy. The moment Mary turned her back for a few minutes, Emily glanced at the yard and saw Jacob standing closer to the gate than usual. A strange sound rang out, a soft braking noise or a vehicle pulling up to the curb. Then Emily caught a glimpse of a man standing just outside the gate. Only seconds later, Jacob was no longer in his spot. Emily called for him but got no answer. Ran down into the yard, and Jacob was gone. When Mary came outside, the gate was slightly ajar, and fresh tire tracks were visible in the thin layer of dust on the narrow road out front. Daniel immediately sprinted to the end of the street, looking down intersecting alleys, but seeing no sign of any vehicle. In the first 2 to 3 minutes after Jacob disappeared, the family and neighbors from both sides spread out searching vacant lots, calling the child's name, checking dry wells and quickly scanning backyards, but every effort turned up nothing. Realizing their own search was yielding no results, and time was passing too quickly, Daniel ran back inside, picked up the phone, and told the operator that their 3-year-old son had vanished right in front of their house, likely taken by a stranger. Daniel Ward's call was logged by the 911 operator at 9:18 a.m. and immediately flagged as a child emergency incident. The operator quickly reviewed the information: victim's age, circumstances of the disappearance, presence of a suspect vehicle, and the extremely short time frame ruling out a simple wandering off. All of this data was relayed to the Springfield Police Department in under 1 minute. At the dispatch center, the shift sergeant assessed severity using standard criteria: child under 5, missing for under 10 minutes, possible stranger approach, and evidence of a vehicle. With all 4 factors hitting high alert thresholds, the case was classified as a possible abduction, and the rapid response protocol was activated. The 2 closest patrol cars were dispatched first, along with an all-units bulletin asking nearby units to watch for a light blue pickup, a common truck but one rarely seen idling in residential Springfield neighborhoods, on a weekday morning. The lead investigator on duty, experienced in missing children cases, was assigned to take over the scene and determine whether the incident matched the pattern of a vehicular abduction. As the first two patrol cars arrived in the Ward neighborhood, the initial officer on scene began sweeping the area in front of the gate, noting the open gate, the abandoned toys, and fresh tire impressions in the road dust. Another officer approached Daniel and Mary to pin down exactly when Jacob was last seen, how far away Emily had been standing, the line of sight from her position, and the suspected direction the vehicle fled. Based on facts gathered in the first 3 minutes on scene, an initial response perimeter was established, centered on the dirt road running in front of the Ward house, then expanding in both directions to the nearest turns a pickup could reach quickly without obstruction. Officers canvassing the surrounding area moved along intersections, looking for any signs such as skid marks, disturbed soil, or unusual noises residents might have heard. Simultaneously, dispatch requested every patrol unit within a 3-mile radius to report any sighting of a light blue pickup, even if only parked briefly or driving past. Data from patrol cars was compiled to see if any truck matching the description had been in the area during the relevant window. At the scene, the lead investigator documented the exact spot Emily said Jacob had been standing, the distance from gate to roadway, and the range Emily could see at the moment of the incident. That area was then marked off to prevent further disturbance of the dust layer that might hold critical evidence. A preliminary neighborhood map was spread on the hood of a patrol car, so command could identify likely escape routes the blue pickup could have taken within 5 minutes of Jacob's disappearance. Based on that analysis, the coordinating sergeant immediately set up an initial containment ring at neighborhood entry-exit points, positioning 3 temporary patrol teams to log every vehicle matching the description leaving the area. Their job was to monitor traffic as early as possible, distinguishing local residents' familiar vehicles from strangers by license plates, cargo area, and driving behavior. The checkpoint teams reported continuously, so dispatch could shift resources in real time, ensuring the critical golden hour immediately after the incident was not missed. Once the initial containment ring was running smoothly, and there was no longer risk of destroying pursuit trails, the on-scene commander moved to a larger-scale lockdown. A lockdown order was issued for a 300-meter radius around the Ward home, including the dirt road leading to the main street, where tire impressions or other mechanical traces were most likely preserved. 3 intersections within that radius were set up with fixed posts, each staffed by 2 officers, to prevent residents from accidentally entering and disturbing evidence. Nearby homes were asked to leave their yards and walkways untouched. No sweeping or moving items in front yards, because any tire track footprint or drag mark could become vital data. After barriers were in place and a safety buffer established, a Springfield PD K-9 unit was called in. The tracking dog was allowed to scent one of Jacob's abandoned toys near the gate, then released in the direction the suspect was believed to have gone. Initial results showed a clear scent trail leading straight out the gate, across the dusty road in front of the house, and continuing southwest where the vehicle could have turned onto either of 2 routes joining Maplewood Avenue. The K-9 team marked 3 points, where Jacob was last standing, where the scent was strongest right at the roadway, and where the scent abruptly ended, matching the presumed spot the vehicle accelerated away. Ground officers used those markers to reconstruct the sequence of events. They measured distances from the front door to the gate to roadway, and determined Emily's vantage point to quantify the witness's field of view and statement accuracy. The section of roadway showing fresh tire tracks was cordoned off with caution tape, and preliminary analysis showed the impressions were unusually deep for the dry surface, indicating the vehicle had stopped or slowed significantly before leaving. Another team photographed the entire roadway with a 35mm camera while measuring the width of the dual tracks for later comparison against 1972 Missouri registered truck tire databases. Using Emily's initial statement and the K-9 findings, the lead investigator began plotting Jacob's final location. They placed a small stake where the child had stood, measured to the gate, and to where Emily said the stranger appeared for only seconds. Those points were added to the scene diagram to calculate the minimum time the suspect needed to reach Jacob, and carry him out the gate. Once a 2D diagram was complete, the team created a linear timeline map marking exact moments when Jacob was last seen, when Emily looked away and back, when the vehicle likely left, and the maximum time the suspect could still have been inside the 300-meter radius before clearing the blockade. From that map, investigators narrowed likely escape routes. Northwest was ruled out first. It was a dead end with no fresh tire marks. East had 2 turns, but that route had soft soil from recent watering and should have shown clearer tracks if the truck went that way. Only Southwest matched all data. It aligned with the K9 track, the only witness account of hearing a vehicle slow, and the point where scent vanished. On the preliminary map, 3 points of interest were circled: the Maplewood intersection, a shortcut to a larger paved road, and an empty lot where the truck might have paused before continuing. The team also flagged potential evidence drop zones, including soft soil near the fence base and a shallow drainage ditch parallel to the dirt road, where light items like fabric scraps or toys could have been carried by wind or momentum. Meanwhile, the on-scene commander compiled checkpoint data from the first 15 minutes after lockdown. No light blue pickup had exited north or east during the window the suspect could have traveled, further supporting the theory the vehicle escaped southwest. With the priority escape direction narrowed and the immediate gate area scene fully secured, the evidence collection team moved to physical documentation. Forensic officers approached Jacob's last seen location and used casting kits to preserve an adult shoe print in the thin dust. The print was angled left of the gate, much larger than a child's shoe, and not matching any footwear Daniel or family members reported wearing that morning. They poured quick-setting plaster to create an exact depth cast, then labeled it with time, location, and discovery conditions. Next, the team processed the tire tracks on the roadway in front of the Ward house. Because the dry dust created a smooth surface, the tread patterns were relatively clear across the track width and showed signs of stopping or deceleration before turning or accelerating away. Technicians used precision rulers to measure track width and wheelbase, photographing from multiple angles for later comparison with 1972 Missouri truck databases. One section of track about 2 meters from the gate showed a break suggesting the transition from stationary to moving, so that spot was sampled by lightly pressing nylon over the surface to collect dust and any microscopic debris from the tires. Beyond footprints and tire tracks, the team took disturbed soil samples at 2 spots right beside the fence where the suspect likely stood to approach Jacob, and at the road edge where the K9 scent trail ended. For accuracy, they used stainless steel scoops, sealed each sample in evidence bags, and noted soil moisture, color, particle structure, and exposure phase. These samples could later reveal foreign particles from the vehicle, suspect's shoes, or Jacob's clothing, though nothing could be concluded yet. Concurrently, another group documented environmental factors affecting evidence quality. The entire dirt road had a slight southwest slope, causing dust to collect in lower areas. Morning soil moisture was measured as low, consistent with 3 prior sunny days. This made tire and shoe impressions sharper in dry dust, but also vulnerable to wind erosion. Officers recorded average morning wind speed at 8-10 mph, enough to degrade impression sharpness if not protected quickly. Direct sunlight timing was also noted because strong light could rapidly dry compressed marks, complicating later sampling. To prevent environmental distortion, the team took panoramic photos in all 4 cardinal directions, plus close-ups of each sample, before and after collection for a complete visual record. Those photographs were stored on a dedicated case film roll with a time reference board for future lab comparison. All physical evidence was immediately sorted on scene into 3 categories: shoe prints and casts, tire tracks and dust samples, and disturbed soil samples. Each category went into separate boxes, sealed with evidence tape, labeled with codes matching the scene report section 3, and loaded into a transport vehicle for the Springfield PD crime lab. Transport required 2 officers' signatures to maintain unbroken chain of custody. Before leaving the scene, the lead investigator added notes on lighting conditions during sampling, pedestrian traffic levels, and dust layer stability to accurately reflect the reliability of collected tire and shoe impressions. Thanks to this, all initial stage physical evidence was systematically preserved and ready for the next phase of analysis. Immediately after completing the evidence collection at the gate area and the road surface in front of the ward residence, the on-scene commander shifted focus to launching an expanded search within a 5-mile radius, a perimeter determined based on the distance the suspect could have traveled by truck from the moment Jacob went missing until the roadblocks were established. The search was divided into 3 main teams: a foot patrol team responsible for sweeping areas inaccessible to vehicles, a vehicle patrol team tasked with checking all main and secondary roads, and 1 helicopter unit from the Air Support Division to conduct overhead observation of hard-to-reach areas from medium altitude. The foot patrol team was split into 6 4-person units, each equipped with topographic maps and radios to maintain constant contact with the command post. These units swept each sector in a parallel straight-line pattern, starting from the edge of the residential area and gradually moving into vacant lots, backyards of residences, and the short connector roads leading to adjacent neighborhoods. They paid particular attention to low bushes, ground depressions, and any terrain offering natural cover, as those were the locations most likely to retain traces if the suspect had carried a child. Meanwhile, the vehicle patrol team split into 2 directions. One group followed Maplewood Drive, the route where the K9 unit had lost Jacob's scent, and the second group traveled the opposite way to rule out the possibility the suspect had looped back or deliberately turned onto a less traveled road. The patrol vehicles documented road surface conditions, unusual tire tracks, items dropped on the roadway, or signs a vehicle had stopped. Any location showing sunken soil or abnormal tire ruts was assigned a number and reported back to the command center so the forensic team could examine it later. The helicopter unit took off from the Air Support Division's landing zone and conducted its first pass covering the entire residential area, then expanded the observation radius to the full 5 miles. From the air, the crew focused on areas with potential concealment: the wooded section north of Mark Twain Forest and the open clearings in the Ozarks region where dense vegetation could completely hide signs of the suspect's movement if he had left the vehicle and walked a short distance. Taking into account wind direction and morning light conditions, the pilot adjusted altitude to avoid disturbing potential evidence on the ground, while still remaining low enough to spot anomalies, such as vehicle tracks cutting through grass, overturned soil, or sudden vehicle stop marks. After the first pass revealed no clear signs, the air unit conducted a second pass, concentrating on the trails leading into Mark Twain Forest. In the Mark Twain Forest area, the foot teams deployed in a grid pattern, maintaining even spacing to ensure no patch of ground that could conceal evidence was missed. The terrain there consisted primarily of leaf-covered humus that would show disturbance if a person or vehicle had passed through recently. The teams reported several old shoe prints, but none matched the shoe type recovered at the ward residence scene. A few motorcycle tire tracks were noted, but nothing indicated the presence of a larger vehicle, such as a truck. Moving to the Ozarks fields, the search units had to break into smaller groups because of the open but tall grass terrain that restricted ground-level visibility. They advanced in a zigzag pattern to achieve the widest possible coverage while coordinating with the helicopter to identify any unusual off-road tracks on hard ground or distinct paths of flattened grass. Several local farmers' motorcycle tracks were documented, but none aligned with the direction the suspect was likely to have taken, so those traces were removed from the list requiring follow-up. While the expanded search continued, the vehicle patrol teams examined all potential escape routes. The southwest direction, judged the most probable, was scrutinized thoroughly, including secondary roads leading to the major highway. Officers noted fresh tire marks on a section near the Maplewood intersection, but the impressions were faint and not clear enough for immediate comparison with the casts taken at the scene, so the site was flagged for later examination. The southeast and northwest routes were also checked to completely eliminate the possibility of a circuitous escape, but no evidence of a truck having passed was found. After more than 1 hour of simultaneous operations across all three methods, foot, vehicle, and air, all units reported no sign of Jacob or any item belonging to the child. No clothing, toys, fabric, or any trace indicating the suspect had stopped or walked further after leaving the residential area was discovered. Command noted that the complete absence of physical evidence within the 5-mile radius was a significant indicator that the suspect had likely left the area at a steady speed, without any incident forcing him to stop or abruptly change direction. The results of the expanded search led the on-scene team to provisionally conclude that Jacob was no longer in the immediate vicinity, at least not within the range detectable by conventional search methods. Once the expanded search yielded no trace of Jacob within the 5-mile radius, the on-scene commander redirected efforts toward maximizing information from residents living around the Ward home. Officers were assigned to conduct door-to-door canvassing in priority order, starting with houses directly across from the scene and then expanding to the 2 adjacent streets, with the goal of collecting statements about anything seen or heard between 8:30 and 9:20 a.m. The window established as critical. The first witness was an elderly woman living 3 houses down from the Wards, who stated she heard a vehicle slow down very close to her living room window at a time matching Jacob's disappearance. She did not get a clear look at the vehicle but confirmed the engine sound was unlike those of familiar neighbors' cars. The next witness, a man watering his backyard garden, reported seeing a light green truck moving slowly past the turn into the neighborhood. However, distance and trees blocking the line of sight prevented him from determining the make or license plate. Another household to the south described seeing the truck briefly stopped in front of the Ward yard from a second-floor bedroom window. The resident did not see the driver, but noted the vehicle had an enclosed box-style cargo area, distinguishing it from the open bed common in Springfield at that time. To prevent discrepancies among statements, investigators created a standardized form with 3 specific fields: vehicle color, cargo area description, and time of sighting. When cross-referenced, most witnesses agreed on a light green or blue-green shade, while descriptions of the cargo area split into 2 groups, one stating it was fully enclosed, the others saying they could not see clearly enough to confirm. Regarding timing, the majority placed the truck's appearance between 9:05 and 9:12 a.m. Exactly matching the period, Emily lost sight of Jacob and Daniel began searching. Additionally, officers paid special attention to the statement of a man living at the southwest corner who reported hearing a short, sharp sound like a vehicle door slamming hard, followed by the engine revving and the vehicle accelerating faster than normal. Although the sound alone was not enough to identify the vehicle, it corresponded precisely with the location where the K9 unit had lost Jacob's scent, making this statement one of the key timeline markers. From the canvassed homes, investigators recorded a total of 12 witnesses who provided information directly relevant to the incident window. 8 either saw or heard the green truck, 3 reported only unidentified vehicle sounds, and 1 resident reported not seeing a truck but noticing a stranger standing at the end of the street roughly 10 minutes before the abduction. That stranger report was added to the file for later verification because the description was too vague to immediately connect to the case. To ensure no minor detail was overlooked, the lead investigator instructed officers to document even small observations such as which doors were open, who was outside, and who had left or entered their home during the suspect time frame. These data points were plotted on an expanded scene map, creating a detailed timeline based on neighborhood activity. When compiled, the investigation team noted significant consistency regarding the truck's direction of travel. Although not every witness saw it turn, the majority indicated it headed southwest upon leaving, reinforcing both the K9 findings and the scene analysis. At the same time, multiple reports of the vehicle slowing or accelerating near the Ward home indicated it had either stopped or driven very slowly, immediately before Jacob vanished. During the canvass, officers also noted other unusual sounds, such as dogs barking to the east around 9 a.m. But after cross-checking timing and location, that event was deemed unrelated to the main sequence. After completing the initial canvass round, investigators compiled a list of witnesses requiring follow-up based on the clarity and usefulness of their information. The three deemed most critical were the elderly woman, who heard the vehicle slow very close by, the second-floor resident, who saw the truck stopped in front of the ward yard, and the corner resident, who heard the door slam. All three were scheduled for same-day re-interviews to clarify additional details about vehicle type, engine noise, and duration of the stop. 5 additional witnesses were placed on a cross-verification list, primarily to confirm timing and their exact vantage points when observing the green truck. Thus, after finishing interviews within the immediate radius, the collected file consisted of multiple independent vantage points that all pointed to the same central fact, the appearance of a green truck precisely during the window in which Jacob disappeared. Immediately after compiling the witness statements and establishing a reasonably stable timeline around the light green truck's appearance, the investigation team moved to the next essential step: examining and ruling out any involvement by the Ward family members themselves. This is standard procedure in every missing child case to ensure subsequent findings are not skewed by a party close to the victim. Daniel and Mary were interviewed in separate locations to prevent any mutual influence on their statements. With Daniel, officers focused on reconstructing his morning movements from waking up until discovering Jacob was gone. Daniel stated he woke around 7 a.m., had breakfast with the family, then went to the backyard to fix a hinge, starting around 8:15. Emily and Jacob were playing in the front yard while Mary cleaned the kitchen. Daniel said he only left his repair spot a few brief times to grab a screwdriver or water, but always heard Emily talking to Jacob or the sound of the child's footsteps in the yard. When asked to pinpoint when he last heard Jacob, Daniel estimated between 9:10 and 9:15, consistent with Emily's account. This statement was recorded as fully consistent with the rest of the family's information. Mary was interviewed separately in a neighbor's living room to avoid pressure from the crime scene environment. She stated she had been in the kitchen almost continuously from 8:20 to 9:15, preparing food, only stepping out front a few times to ask Emily if she wanted water. Regarding the front gate, Mary said she had not fully closed it that morning, because the children regularly played in the front yard, which matched neighbors' observations that the gate was usually left ajar in the mornings. When asked for the last moment she saw Jacob, Mary recalled him standing near the porch steps with his toy around 9:05, after which she returned to the kitchen for a few minutes. At approximately 9:12, when Emily called out, Mary ran outside and saw Jacob was gone. This timing aligned with witness reports of the truck stopping and then accelerating, forming a continuous chain of events. The team then cross-checked the couple's timelines. Although exact minute-by-minute confirmation was impossible, all major markers fell within a reasonable and consistent window that matched objective witness data. The distance between Daniel's repair location in the backyard and the front gate was measured to determine whether he could have reached the gate in seconds to stage anything. The measurement showed it was physically impossible in the available time, especially given that multiple independent witnesses placed the green truck at the scene exactly when Jacob vanished. In addition to timeline comparison, police conducted background checks on both parents. The Ward family had a stable residence history with no record of serious legal or financial issues, and no reports of domestic violence or disputes that could provide motive to harm a child. Daniel had worked steadily at a local woodworking shop for years, and was described by co-workers as calm and reliable. Mary worked part-time with a consistent schedule. There was no indication either parent was connected to any individual or situation that could put their son at risk. Police also reviewed close family contacts, including relatives who visited regularly, Emily's friends, and neighborhood families who interacted with Jacob. None had any prior suspicions or the opportunity to access Jacob at the precise moment of the incident. A crucial factor was that multiple independent witnesses saw or heard the green truck within seconds of Jacob's disappearance, creating a completely separate information thread from the Ward family. When combined with the tire casts, shoe prints and canine scent direction, every piece of evidence pointed to an outside perpetrator rather than anyone inside the household. The entire analysis was documented in a separate report to maintain investigative objectivity. After thoroughly comparing timelines, sources, backgrounds, relationships, and finding no inconsistencies between Daniel's and Mary's statements, the investigation team concluded there was no evidence supporting Ward family involvement in Jacob's disappearance. With this determination, the team officially cleared the family of suspicion and shifted full focus to an external suspect. Right after ruling out any involvement from within the Ward family itself, the investigation team shifted to screening the list of local residents to identify individuals with unusual behavior or histories that might fit the pattern of approaching young children. The Springfield PD maintained a file of persons previously complained about for disturbing behavior or minor violations, and from that list, 3 individuals were flagged for checking, with Roger Hale standing out the most. A man who lived about 4 houses down from the Wards. Hale had previously been reported by neighbors for watching children playing in yards without any clear reason, though the earlier incidents hadn't been enough to charge him with anything. Additionally, part of the neighborhood witness statements mentioned someone seeing Hale standing on the street corner that morning, though the recorded time didn't perfectly match the exact window of Jacob's disappearance. The team decided to start with Hale because his house fell within the radius a suspect could walk to reach the Ward property without drawing attention. That same afternoon, officers approached Hale for a quick initial interview with basic questions. His first statements were vague. He couldn't provide a clear timeline of what he had been doing between 8:45 and 9:20 a.m. When asked if he had seen a green pickup truck in the neighborhood, Hale said, maybe, but couldn't pin down a specific time. This inconsistency led the officers to mark Hale both as a witness needing further follow-up and as a person of interest requiring additional checking. Based on the level of suspicion and his close geographic proximity to the scene, a search warrant was obtained and approved to examine Hale's residence, focusing on any evidence that might link to Jacob or any signs a small child had been inside the house that morning. The warrant was executed late that afternoon, with a team of 4 officers approaching Hale's wooden house. The home had 2 small bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen, many areas cluttered and with limited sight lines. The officers split up to search each room. They looked for children's clothing, fabrics, toys, or anything inconsistent with a man living alone. Closets were opened, every box and drawer checked, and they even looked under the bed and behind the refrigerator to make sure no small evidence was missed. During the search, several items were noted: old newspapers, soda cans, a toolbox, and various worthless knickknacks. Nothing of investigative value. There were no signs that any stranger, especially a small child, had been in the house on the day of the incident. The search team then extended to the backyard, where Hale kept a small metal shed. Inside were old gardening tools and a few empty wooden crates, but nothing showed recent use that morning, or any connection to an abduction. Officers also examined Hale's vehicle tires to see if they could match the tire tracks found at the scene. However, Hale only owned an old sedan with tires completely different from the pattern collected in front of the Ward house. A technician confirmed that Hale's tires could not have produced tracks with the same width and tread depth. When the search concluded, all potential evidence was reviewed again, but nothing matched any trace from where Jacob disappeared or along the suspected escape route. To ensure nothing was missed regarding timing, investigators re-examined the witness report of seeing Hale on the corner that morning. After cross-checking the time, location, and the witness's line of sight, they concluded the sighting occurred at least 15 minutes before Jacob vanished and had no direct connection to the main event. The tire tracks, shoe prints, and canine scent direction all failed to match anything related to Hale, making his involvement highly unlikely. Based on the objective data, the timeline mismatches, the absence of physical evidence, and the lack of a vehicle matching the described green truck, the investigation team concluded that Hale had no involvement in Jacob's disappearance. His name was removed from the primary suspect list and retained only as a secondary witness if needed later. Clearing Hale helped narrow the focus of the investigation and prevented resources from being wasted on a dead-end lead. As soon as Roger Hale was eliminated from the suspect list due to the complete mismatch in evidence, vehicle, and timing, the team moved on to building a criminal profile based on the data collected at the scene. Creating an offender profile became the necessary next step to determine the type of suspect that best fit the sequence of events and thereby narrow the search. The core data points included: the suspect handled the entire incident in just a few minutes, approached unnoticed in a quiet residential neighborhood, removed the victim from the scene quickly using a vehicle, and left behind no highly identifiable evidence. First, the team analyzed how the suspect approached Jacob. Based on Emily's statement and the location of the traces, the suspect got extremely close to the ward gate without making unusual noise. This suggested two possibilities. The suspect had previously observed the area and chosen a moment when no adult was in the front yard, or the suspect was very familiar with the neighborhood's typical sounds and knew how to move silently. The distance from the curb to where Jacob stood was only a few meters, and the time needed for an adult to scoop up a 3-year-old and return to the vehicle was just 10-15 seconds. This led investigators to assess that the perpetrator acted with considerable confidence and speed, not the behavior of an impulsive or uncontrolled offender. Next, the evaluation focused on the abduction itself and removing Jacob from the scene. The truck slowing and stopping exactly in front of the ward house showed the suspect had precisely identified the target and did not stop at the wrong place. This ran counter to a random opportunity model. Stopping accurately without drawing attention required prior observation and recognition of Jacob from a distance. The timeline from when the suspect stopped to when the truck left matched all witness statements, meaning the abduction happened while Mary was in the kitchen and Daniel was in the backyard. A very narrow window, but sufficient if the perpetrator had planned it. This ruled out a crime of opportunity and instead pointed to a perpetrator who had likely been watching the target for days. The team then examined how the suspect fled. The tire marks showed a rapid transition from stop to accelerating, with no signs of loss of control or hard braking. This indicated the suspect encountered no resistance when placing Jacob in the vehicle, and that the child did not make loud enough noise to attract attention. This is a common factor in stranger child abductions. Perpetrators often target children under 5 because their ability to resist or scream loudly is limited. The next line of analysis focused on the level of preparation. Very few traces were left at the scene, indicating the perpetrator carried nothing likely to fall, made no heavy contact with the surroundings, and created no distraction. The truck did not linger longer than necessary, showed no turnaround marks or overlapping tire tracks, meaning the suspect took the most direct escape route and minimized observable maneuvers. Investigators compared this behavior to compiled data from child abductions in the Midwest during the 1960s, 1970s. Reports from that era showed recurring patterns. Suspects often used pickup trucks or older sedans that blended easily into local traffic. They targeted homes with unlocked gates or quiet neighborhoods, and they struck when adults were briefly distracted. Jacob's case matched nearly every criterion. A key matching factor was the vehicle type. A light green Ford pickup was extremely common in Missouri and Arkansas at the time, typically driven by independent contractors, day laborers, or traveling tradesmen. This raised the possibility that the suspect led a transient lifestyle, moved frequently, and left few traces in any local community. Additionally, the box-style enclosed bed described by one witness suggested the perpetrator deliberately chose a vehicle that improved the ability to conceal the victim immediately after the abduction. When analyzing the risk level, the team noted the behavior was calculated high risk. Abducting a child directly from the front yard in a neighborhood with potential passers-by was highly risky, unless the perpetrator was prepared. Yet the extremely tight time frame between Jacob losing adult supervision and the truck departing showed the perpetrator understood the Ward family's routine or had watched for several days to identify safe windows. This level of calculation strengthened the hypothesis that the suspect had no personal relationship with the family. Someone familiar would choose a lower-risk opportunity rather than a bold daytime grab. Prior sightings of the green truck driving slowly through the neighborhood multiple times were also a clear indicator of a stranger offender. An acquaintance would not need repeated drive-bys without entering the home. When all characteristics were compiled, rapid execution, targeting a very young child, direct approach in a short window, immediate departure by vehicle, and no identifying traces, the investigation team concluded that the behavior best fit the stranger abductor profile. This was the hardest type to track in the pre-modern forensics era because such offenders often crossed state lines, changed residences constantly, and maintained no fixed community ties. With this conclusion, the investigation officially shifted toward screening individuals unknown to the family, but who could have been in the area at the time of the incident. Immediately after the team determined the most likely offender model was a stranger abductor, initial hopes rested on finding additional leads from the neighborhood or passers-by. However, in the days that followed, no new witnesses came forward, even though police expanded canvassing 2 full blocks farther and continued knocking on doors, hoping someone had seen the green truck more clearly that morning. Many residents said they had heard about the case through the media and double-checked their own schedules for that day, but no one recalled any helpful new details. This caused witness information to reach saturation quickly, unable to add new points to the timeline or the suspect's initial direction of travel. Meanwhile, identifying the suspect vehicle proved harder than expected. Although investigators had tire track measurements from the scene, comparing them to databases of common trucks in Missouri and neighboring states revealed more than 40 different models and years that could produce similar tracks. The lack of a license plate or any specific identifying mark prevented narrowing the field. Even screening registered trucks in the Springfield area failed to definitively rule out any model, since vehicles could be driven by non-owners or by people from out of town. Records from local gas stations, repair shops, and farm markets were checked, but none matched the timing and vehicle description. In an effort to reinforce the initial hypotheses, the lead investigator ordered a full reanalysis of all scene evidence, using manual measurements combined with photographic enlargement to detect any tiny overlooked details. But the results yielded nothing new. The tire tracks remained non-specific enough that they couldn't be traced to a single tire brand. The shoe prints only reflected common size and sole pattern, and soil samples contained no unusual material worth analyzing. The forensics team described it as a clean scene, in the sense that the perpetrator left no identifying information, which drastically reduced the ability to develop leads from physical evidence. After re-evaluating witness statements, the team looked for any small inconsistencies that might open new avenues, such as discrepancies in timing or vehicle shape. However, all key statements remained consistent about the green truck appearing within the few-minute window around Jacob's disappearance, while secondary details like number of doors, bed length, or exact shade of paint fell outside reliable observation range. This kept witness data at a general description level, unable to advance toward identifying the driver or vehicle. The broader search area was also reassessed, but no evidence suggested the suspect stopped or deviated from the main roads. In fast-acting abduction cases, perpetrators commonly leave the area without leaving traces. But here, that meant the investigation was completely stalled. An internal meeting was held to review the entire first-week progress. The report showed physical evidence could not be expanded. Additional witnesses were zero. The vehicle could not be identified, and no database available at the time could help track a stranger moving quickly through a neighborhood. After 1 week with no new progress, Springfield PD was forced to move the case to passive monitoring status, meaning they would continue to receive tips from the public and check reports of missing or abandoned children in surrounding areas, but no longer maintain a large dedicated team at the scene. This was standard procedure in the 1970s, when there were no automated license plate readers, civilian surveillance cameras, or interstate databases for simple vehicle descriptions. The case file remained open during this phase, but according to the Coordination Office's review cycle, after 2 weeks without fresh leads, it was classified as no progress. The internal conclusion at that point was that every piece of collected information led to a dead end. Jacob had been removed from the area in a time frame too short for local forces to intercept, and there was no evidence the suspect remained within Springfield's boundaries. This marked the investigation's first true deadlock, with all pursuit avenues halted and no viable next steps available. In the late 1970s, as Jacob's disappearance had dragged on for years with no progress, the Springfield Police Department continued to passively monitor reports from multiple states, particularly those containing similar elements regarding age, circumstances of appearance, or descriptions involving a green pickup truck. Among the leads forwarded to them, the most notable was a boy abandoned in a small town near Fayetteville, Arkansas, in 1977. The child was found in good health, approximately 3 to 4 years old, with no identification documents, and no one came forward to claim him. Because Arkansas was only a few hours' drive from Missouri, the case was quickly sent to Springfield PD for evaluation of possible connection. Investigators reviewed the hospital records in Fayetteville, noting the child's height, weight, and identifying features, then compared them against the existing data on Jacob from 1972. Since DNA testing did not yet exist, verification relied primarily on physical characteristics and statements from people who had contact with the boy. Officers from Springfield PD traveled to Arkansas to assess the situation in person. They noted that the child had different hair and eye color from Jacob's description, and the small birthmark on Jacob's left shoulder was absent, and local residents who first saw the boy reported he had been left behind an old sedan, not a pickup truck, with no witnesses reporting a green truck in the area at that time. These discrepancies made a connection unlikely. After completing the comparison, Springfield PD officially ruled out any link to Jacob and closed the Arkansas file as an unidentified child, completely separate from the original case. Another lead, reported in late 1978, came from Illinois, where local police noted a light green pickup truck seen near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Decatur. The caller said the truck looked old, was driving unusually slowly along a dirt road, and left immediately after spotting people. Because the vehicle description closely matched the one in Jacob's case, the information was shared with Springfield PD for possible connection. Investigators compared the Illinois witness statements with existing records. Both described a light green truck, but the Illinois witness said it had an open bed, unlike the enclosed box-type bed described by the second-floor apartment witness in Springfield. The engine noise reported in Illinois was also different. A loud rumbling sound, while the Springfield witness only heard a normal engine loud enough to slow down but not draw major attention. Springfield PD asked Illinois authorities to check for license plates or any physical evidence at the warehouse site, but nothing traceable was found. A second report from Illinois involved a man in a green truck who was suspected of asking for directions to a residential area with many young children. However, the description of the man did not match any statements collected by Springfield, and the sighting occurred nearly 6 years after Jacob's abduction, making a behavioral link weak. Ultimately, both Illinois reports were retained for monitoring, but lacked sufficient basis to be considered credible leads. Beyond Arkansas and Illinois, Springfield PD received scattered tips from neighboring states, such as Kansas and Oklahoma, most involving someone seeing a suspicious green pickup truck. However, the descriptions were either too vague or lacked supporting evidence, such as photos, license plates, or physical traces, preventing them from developing into viable investigative avenues. In the 1970s context, with no interstate data sharing system, every report had to be manually verified, causing many leads to be dismissed, simply because deeper analysis was impossible. After reviewing all out-of-state reports from 1976, 1979, Springfield PD compiled them and concluded that none represented a breakthrough or generated new leads in Jacob's disappearance. Critical elements, victim identification characteristics, the suspect's likely escape route, and physical evidence did not match any reported case from that period. An internal late 1970s report stated that the out-of-state leads were misdirected and contributed no actionable data or help in narrowing suspects. This left the investigation still stalled for lack of information, with all comparison efforts limited to documentation rather than new actions. Entering the 1980s, Springfield PD underwent personnel changes, and during a routine review of unsolved missing persons cases, Jacob Ward's file was assigned to a new detective tasked with re-evaluating all data collected from 1972 through the late 1970s. The review was not intended to formally reopen the investigation, but to determine whether any information had been overlooked or needed restructuring to align with improved analytical methods since the crime occurred. The detective started with the most basic sources, witness statements. He reorganized all notes chronologically, removed duplicates, and standardized descriptions based on each witness's vantage point and location. In doing so, he noticed that some previously dismissed statements could offer new insight when viewed in context. For example, a distant resident's claim of seeing the green truck twice the same morning, rather than once, or a report of unusually loud engine noise 7 houses west of the Ward home. These details were flagged for reliability assessment, but remained too vague to establish a specific suspect behavior pattern. From the reorganized statements, the detective created a detailed map of green truck sightings in the days immediately preceding the abduction. Records showed the vehicle had been seen by at least 4 witnesses on 3 separate mornings, twice driving very slowly, almost circling the neighborhood. Plotting each sighting on a map revealed the locations formed a closed loop around the Ward residence rather than extending into adjacent areas. While not conclusive proof the truck belonged to the abductor, the pattern indicated at least one vehicle matching the description had behaved unusually in the period leading up to the crime and may have been monitoring the family. To broaden the analysis, the detective examined crime reports from neighboring Midwest states during the same time frame for similar incidents, especially child abductions from yards or directly in front of homes. Reviewing data from Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Illinois, he noted several cases sharing general elements, quick approaches to children, or old pickup trucks. But similarities were superficial and did not suggest a single interstate offender or organized pattern. In reality, green pickup trucks were so common in the 1970s, 1980s, that the color alone held little identifying value. Several child disappearances in Arkansas and Oklahoma were considered, but none linked to Jacob due to mismatched timelines, victim ages, and evidence. Reports of men in trucks approaching areas with children were compared, but descriptions of appearance, gait, or voice showed no overlap. The detective also considered the possibility the suspect did not live in Springfield but was passing through or working temporarily in the area. However, 1970s seasonal worker records were incomplete, with no centralized registration and no traffic cameras to capture vehicle movement. This was an inherent limitation of the pre-surveillance era. Despite wanting to analyze the green truck's movement pattern further, the detective lacked sufficient data to infer origin or actual route because no witness saw the truck leave the neighborhood in a specific direction after accelerating. All sightings showed the vehicle appearing and disappearing within a very short window, leaving no trace at farther checked locations. Thus, the vehicle lead remained a barrier that 1980s technology could not overcome. During the review, the detective also explored re-examining stored physical evidence, but shoe print and soil analysis still relied on manual methods, with no trace evidence comparison or large databases for sole patterns or soil chemistry. The collected soil sample was deemed of insufficient value because it contained only common local contaminants and could not trace vehicle or suspect origin. The shoe print cast could not identify brand or model due to the extremely common tread pattern. These technological limitations caused every re-examination effort to reach a dead end, despite clearer data organization. Upon completing the review, the detective concluded that although file organization had improved, no new information was strong enough to alter investigative direction or open additional avenues. The internal report stated clearly, "The case file has been effectively restructured, but lacks the technological foundation to advance further. The case therefore remained on passive monitoring status, awaiting future methods or information capable of producing a breakthrough." In the 1990s, when Springfield PD conducted its periodic review of unsolved cases more than 2 decades old, Jacob Ward's file was pulled again to determine its status under Missouri's new procedures for long-term child missing persons cases. Overall assessment showed the case had undergone all standard investigative steps of the 1970s and 1980s, but yielded no additional data that could expand or redirect analysis. The previous reviewing detective also reported no realistic prospect for new progress, as even improved contemporary technology could not deeply analyze the originally limited evidence. On that basis, the decision was made: Jacob Ward's case would be officially reclassified as a cold case, child abduction, under the new statewide categorization system. Transferring a case to cold case status required a formal evidence sealing process to maximize future usability. The crime scene unit re-examined every item stored since 1972. Shoe print casts, soil and road dust samples, scene photographs, statement transcripts, route maps, and all records related to the suspect vehicle. Each item was assessed for condition, then repackaged using 1990S standard preservation materials to protect against moisture, light, and temperature changes. Paper evidence was laminated or placed in acid-free boxes. Solid items were sealed in individually numbered containers. Every piece was labeled with case number, collection date, and final inventory officer. Concurrently, administrative staff restructured the investigative file. Previously inconsistent formats were organized chronologically and thematically: crime scene, witnesses, physical evidence, route analysis, vehicle analysis, family interviews, suspect checks, and 1980s review findings. All pages were numbered, a detailed index created, and copies retained at Springfield PD, while originals were prepared for transfer, a mandatory step to ensure file integrity across agencies. Once restructuring and sealing were complete, Springfield PD contacted the Missouri State Cold Case Unit to report the case eligible for handover. A dedicated team from the unit visited Springfield to verify evidence condition and cross-check the file, confirming all related materials were present with no missing pages or coding errors. They paid particular attention to chain of custody documentation, as decades-old cases risked loss or degradation if initial preservation was substandard. The cold case unit representatives noted that, although evidence volume was low, Springfield PD's storage quality was good compared to typical 1970s cases, increasing the likelihood of future usability should analytical technology advance sufficiently. By the mid-1990s, a formal transfer document was executed, listing case number, evidence count, file condition, cross-references, and signatures from both agencies. From the moment of signing, Jacob Ward's case was no longer under Springfield PD's active jurisdiction and became the full responsibility of the Missouri State Cold Case Unit, which would maintain storage, conduct periodic reviews, and assess potential reopening when new technology or information becomes available. With all procedures completed, the Jacob Ward case was officially placed on Missouri's list of long-term unsolved child disappearances, ending more than 2 decades of active local investigation and moving the file into long-term preservation status, awaiting better future investigative conditions. After the Jacob Ward case file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit in the 1990s, the story of the victim continued to exist in parallel under a completely different identity: Michael Turner, that no one in the investigative community at the time was aware of. Michael appeared in the Kansas state administrative system at the end of 1973, when his legal guardian, Helen Turner, registered a delayed birth certificate and added him to the Sedgwick County residency list. School records show that Michael started kindergarten in Wichita in 1977 and continued through elementary and high school without any significant interruptions. Academic files described Michael as an average to above-average student who kept a low profile and participated in few extracurricular activities, a pattern typical of children raised without a full traditional family structure. In his school records, the emergency contact field always listed only Helen Turner, with no other relatives ever named. When Michael reached his teenage years, the school required the original birth certificate to complete his permanent file, but Helen provided only a delayed certificate issued when he was over a year old, listing a birth date of October 1972 that did not match the age he had been enrolled under in kindergarten. The discrepancy was noted by school staff, but because there was no unified federal database for cross-checking at the time, they accepted the document as submitted and did not demand further proof of origin. During periodic residency record audits conducted by Sedgwick County, Michael's birth certificate also raised questions because it was not accompanied by a hospital certificate of live birth. The delayed certificate bore only Helen Turner's signature and stated that the child was born outside a medical facility, which was uncommon but still legal under local law at the time. Some administrative staff asked Helen to verify the place of birth or provide witness information from the delivery, but she consistently replied that she was no longer in contact with anyone who could confirm it and could not provide additional details. In internal notes, Michael's file was marked incomplete but valid and was not considered a risk because there was no evidence of outright forgery. However, when compared to later document verification standards, numerous red flags were clearly present. The birth date did not match his kindergarten enrollment age, there were no original vaccination records, and there was a complete absence of any medical paperwork from the newborn period. One school required Helen to provide proof of immunizations because the records submitted only covered shots given from age 2 onward. When asked, Helen said the earlier care had been at a small clinic in Missouri that has since closed, making verification impossible. The school accepted the solution of having Michael revaccinated for several diseases to meet minimum public school requirements, thereby papering over the unusual absence of original records. When Michael became an adult and applied for temporary factory work in the area, the HR department noted another irregularity. His Social Security number had been issued later than was typical for people his age, and there was no medical documentation confirming any doctor visits or vaccinations during his first year of life. An HR staff member asked Helen about it, and she gave the same type of answer as before. The hospital where I gave birth no longer has the records. Because there was no cross-checking system and no reason to suspect criminal activity, Michael's paperwork was accepted without further investigation. Yet the gaps remained, quietly creating a chain of inconsistent information that stretched across years. By the late 1990s, when Michael applied to replace some identification documents, the administrative office noticed one striking detail: the hospital name listed on his delayed birth certificate did not match any actual medical facility operating in Missouri in 1972. When staff asked Helen to confirm, she simply said it was old family information and provided nothing more. Because no missing person report was linked to the name Michael Turner in Kansas's internal systems, the issue was once again overlooked. All of these irregularities existed in Michael's records for years, but never triggered a criminal suspicion, because no one was looking for a connection between him and a missing child case in another state from more than 2 decades earlier. In that era, such administrative shortcomings were not rare, especially in small communities where children were registered late or born outside medical facilities. But under modern investigative standards, Michael Turner's file showed clear signs of lacking verifiable origins from a very early stage, only no one at the time had a reason or the tools to connect those pieces into a coherent whole. As an adult, Michael Turner began encountering more administrative procedures that required clearer proof of identity than had been needed during his school years. And it was precisely those requirements that caused him, for the first time, to question his own origins. While preparing paperwork for a vocational loan and tax forms, he was asked to submit an original birth certificate or hospital certificate of live birth for verification. When he searched the personal document box Helen Turner had given him years earlier, he found only the delayed birth certificate issued when he was already over 1 year old, with no accompanying medical records or transfer papers. In the past, the lack of paperwork had never bothered him. But now, with stricter administrative requirements, the anomalies became glaring. No hospital birth record, no clinic notes, no vaccination records from his first year, and no doctor or midwife listed anywhere on his documents. He took everything to Helen to get answers. As she had done many times before, Helen gave inconsistent explanations. Sometimes she said he was born in Missouri, sometimes in Kansas, sometimes the hospital had closed, sometimes the papers were lost in a move. None of the stories matched or provided anything verifiable. The contradictions made Michael realize for the first time that the story behind his past might not be as straightforward as he had always believed. He began examining every document he had more closely. The birth date on the delayed certificate did not line up with the age listed on later vaccination records. The address Helen had at the time he was supposedly born did not match the one she had previously mentioned. And most importantly, not a single document bore an official medical facility stamp. When he tried to contact the hospital listed on the delayed certificate, Michael discovered that no such facility had ever existed according to Missouri's health records. This forced him to confront the possibility that even his delayed birth certificate did not reflect his true origin. More loose ends kept piling up. He remembered having no relatives visit when he was young. No newborn photos, no baby items or family keepsakes from his earliest years. He also realized that throughout his childhood, Helen had always avoided talking about his first couple of years, and whenever he asked, she would dodge the question or change the subject. Gradually, the inconsistencies in Helen's stories could no longer be explained away as poor memory or lost paperwork. For the first time in his life, Michael faced the feeling that his identity had no solid foundation. These doubts drove him to dig deeper, starting with searching public records in Missouri and Kansas for any birth that matched the date on his paperwork. Finding no hospital records or birth reports that lined up, he realized the problem was even more serious than he thought. Michael decided that the only way to learn the truth was to investigate his origins independently, no longer relying on Helen's accounts. It was no longer just about completing paperwork. It had become a profound personal need to discover who he really was and whether the identity of Michael Turner was hiding a larger, older story he had never been told. The year 2011 marked a critical turning point when the Missouri Cold Case Unit launched a program to re-examine long-dormant missing child cases using modern investigative technology. Among the nearly 200 prioritized cases, the Jacob Ward file, a 3-year-old boy abducted in 1972, was in the small group that had extremely limited physical evidence but stood to benefit enormously from new forensic techniques. Detective Lauren Whitaker, one of the unit's younger but most experienced investigators, was assigned to take over the case. Whitaker was known for her meticulous approach, her ability to reconstruct scattered data, and her persistence with cases that seemed unsolvable. While reading the summary, she immediately noticed two things: the clarity of the 1972 timeline and the mismatch between the apparent danger of the abduction and the tiny amount of physical evidence recovered at the scene. Classic signs of a stranger abduction, the hardest type to trace. Whitaker's first step was to have the entire physical file moved into the unit's new digital system. Jacob Ward's file was still intact in a sealed archival box from the 1990s, containing the shoe print cast, soil samples, crime scene photos, route maps, and more than 200 pages of Springfield PD notes. Everything had to be scanned, coded, categorized, and entered into a searchable digital database, something impossible in earlier decades. Digitization took nearly 2 weeks. Handwritten notes that were barely legible were converted to electronic text, allowing Whitaker to analyze the timeline of every witness statement with far greater clarity. The 1972 crime scene photos were enhanced for contrast, revealing details the naked eye could not fully discern at the time. Once digitization was complete, Whitaker moved to the most important phase, retesting the physical evidence with modern technology. The soil sample taken from in front of the Ward home was analyzed using spectrometry, which detected trace metals and polymers. While the soil overall yielded no breakthrough, Whitaker found a few particles of worn rubber whose molecular structure matched material used in tire manufacturing in the early 1970s. That data was entered into a comparison database, narrowing the list of possible tire types. The shoe print cast, previously considered too generic for analysis, was 3D scanned, capturing every tread mark with high precision. The system identified the sole as belonging to a common line produced by Midwest Manufacturing between 1968 and 1974. The result did not eliminate any specific suspect, but provided a more accurate profile of the type of shoe the perpetrator likely wore. Though not individually identifying, it supported the conclusion that the perpetrator was most likely a working-age male, as that style was popular among construction workers and laborers at the time. But the detail that intrigued Whitaker most was not in the physical evidence, it was in the description of the truck. Once digitization was finished, she ran automated text analysis software across every witness statement, looking for repeated patterns in vehicle descriptions. The results uncovered a key detail that had been overlooked for decades. Every witness who described a green truck called the color light green, but 2 other witnesses, previously dismissed as unreliable, described the truck as having silver paint streaks or blotches along the side. In the 1970s, that detail was not given weight because too few witnesses mentioned it. For Whitaker, however, it was rare and potentially identifying. Searching vintage truck databases, she discovered that only certain Ford models from 1968, 1971 had factory paint that was prone to fading or flaking into silver streaks under sunlight, especially the light green shade, as the top coat wore away over time. This narrowed the possible trucks from dozens of models to just 3 main body styles. Whitaker then used frequency mapping software to replot the truck's sightings in the days before the abduction. When reconstructed, the movement pattern formed a semicircle around the Ward neighborhood and consistently appeared in the morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m., highly characteristic of a stalker monitoring a target. The probability-based mapping software she used showed that the truck's departure direction on the day of the crime aligned with the highway route from Springfield toward the Kansas border, where in 1973, Michael Turner appeared with a birth certificate of unclear origin. Although Whitaker could not yet prove a connection, the coincidence was immediately flagged as a high-level anomaly. The combination of the silver streak description, the repeated same-time appearances over multiple days, the movement pattern consistent with an interstate route, and the fact that no vehicle matching the description was ever registered locally in Springfield, led Whitaker to conclude that the suspect truck probably did not belong to a resident. The perpetrator was far more likely someone who traveled frequently, worked temporary jobs, or lived outside the Springfield area, which explained why he left no trace in Missouri vehicle records. This was the first time since 1972 that a technical analysis had been able to completely reorient the focus of the investigation, thanks to the combination of modern technology and fully digitized data structure. Whitaker knew that pursuing the truck was not just a critical lead, it might be the key to the true identity of Jacob Ward, who could now be living under the name Michael Turner. In 2011, while Detective Lauren Whitaker was rebuilding the entire case structure with modern technology, a separate development unfolded in Kansas, completely independent at the time, but destined to become the single most explosive turning point in the entire Jacob Ward file. After months of unease about the irregularities in his personal documents and the inconsistent stories about his origins, Michael Turner decided to seek answers through a method many friends had mentioned: consumer genealogy, DNA testing via online databases. His initial goal was not to find biological family, but simply to see whether genetic data could confirm his ethnic background, geographic origins, or Helen Turner's accounts. He mailed in a saliva kit and completed the account registration in May 2011, never imagining that this action was about to trigger a chain of events linking him directly to a 1972 missing child case in Missouri. When the lab processed his DNA and uploaded it for matching, the system found numerous distant cousin-level connections, normal for genealogy tests. But one result stood out, an unusually high-level match with two individuals carrying the surname Ward, who lived in Missouri. The algorithms estimated that Michael could be a direct grandchild or child of someone in the Ward lineage, with over 25% shared DNA, strong enough to trigger a system alert. A few days later, when Michael logged in, he saw the notification close family-level DNA match detected. He was stunned. Helen had never mentioned the name Ward, and he had never known he might have relatives in Missouri. He read the detailed genetic analysis, which suggested a first or second degree relationship with at least one of the two Ward accounts. Curious and unsettled, Michael sent an automated genealogy message to one of the Ward profiles. I received a close DNA match result. I'm not sure if we're actually related, but I'd like to understand more about my background. Meanwhile, because of the high match level, and because the Ward family had previously registered a missing teen profile in the national system, the Consumer DNA Company's administration automatically flagged the result with a potential match for missing child case alert. The Wards had entered their search data years earlier, when DNA technology first became available to the public. Company policy required staff to notify law enforcement whenever a result matched an active missing person case flagged by family. Because the Jacob Ward file was still being actively maintained by the family and had never been permanently closed by the Missouri Cold Case Unit, the alert was routed directly to Springfield PD's intake system. The notice was simple, but attention-grabbing: genealogy DNA match related to Ward family. Recommend comparison with 1972 missing person case. When Springfield PD received it, archives immediately forwarded the alert to the Cold Case Unit, since the Jacob Ward file had been transferred there in the 1990s. Detective Lauren Whitaker received the internal email on a morning in early June 2011, the same week she was finalizing her analysis of the Silver Streak truck description. The subject line read, "Possible genetic match identified, case Ward, Jacob. Please review." Whitaker instantly understood that this could be the first high-probability lead about the victim's identity in nearly 40 years. Consumer genealogy matches cannot confirm identity on their own, but a match this strong between a man in Kansas and two Ward family members in Missouri was virtually impossible to ignore. Within an hour, Whitaker requested additional anonymized data on the submitting sample. She did not yet know the man's name, but the system provided estimated age, residence region, and genetic similarity percentages. All of it lined up with the age Jacob Ward would be, if still alive, another striking coincidence. When she ran an expanded comparison, the degree of shared DNA was strong enough to conclude the man could not be a distant relative. The algorithm indicated he was most likely a direct child or grandchild of Jacob's parental generation. That effectively narrowed the possibilities to two scenarios. Either he was a child of someone in the Ward family, or he was Jacob himself. At virtually the same moment, on Michael's side, one of the Ward accounts responded to his message. The reply was cautious but emotional. "Our family has had a relative missing since 1972. If you're willing to talk, maybe we should compare information." Reading those words, Michael felt the weight of his entire life shift. If this was true, then all his questions about his origins were not just paperwork problems, they might be concealing a far larger truth. He agreed to continue the conversation and simultaneously contacted the testing company to request a full backup of his raw data in case further verification was needed. While Michael processed a mixture of anxiety and hope, Springfield PD formally reopened the full Jacob Ward file in preparation for a possible true match. The Cold Case Unit placed a priority flag on the case, and Detective Whitaker knew she was standing on the verge of solving a mystery that had lasted nearly half a century. Immediately after the genealogy DNA system detected a genetic match between Michael Turner and two individuals with the surname Ward, Detective Lauren Whitaker understood that to turn the initial signal into authentic legal evidence, she needed to conduct an official federal standard DNA verification process. The first step was to collect a DNA sample from Jacob Ward's biological relative, specifically his older sister Emily Ward, the only surviving family member whose DNA profile had been entered into the missing children database in the late 1990s, but had never been compared to any sample. Whitaker contacted Emily in mid-June 2011. The call began with identity verification and statement of purpose, and when Whitaker mentioned that a civilian genealogy DNA sample showed a possible genetic match with the family, Emily fell almost completely silent. She asked, "Do you mean someone might belong to my family?" Whitaker could not jump to conclusions, but she explained that the DNA similarity was extremely high and requested an official sample for comparison. Emily agreed immediately. 3 days later, she arrived at the state-contracted laboratory in Missouri, where a technician collected buccal swab cells and a blood sample following standard protocol. The sample was securely packaged, encrypted, and sent to two independent laboratories, one state-run in Missouri and one federal, to ensure results were not skewed by error or data noise. While awaiting testing, Whitaker obtained a warrant to verify the identity of the man behind the civilian DNA sample, but because the genealogy platform did not provide names directly, she had to go through formal channels to have the system release Michael Turner's contact information to investigators. When contacted, Michael was cooperative and agreed to provide an official DNA sample. He went to the laboratory in Wichita, Kansas. Michael's DNA was processed simultaneously with Emily's under secure anonymous codes to guarantee completely objective analysis. This round of testing went beyond autosomal DNA matching used in civilian genealogy. It also examined additional genetic markers used in missing person kinship identification, compared the degree of match between full siblings, and verified blood relationship under 3 models: full siblings, half siblings, and no relation. The Missouri State Lab finished first. Whitaker received an automated email from the analysis system, match probability 99.98%. Relationship consistent with full sibling. That meant the probability that Michael and Emily were not full siblings was only 0.02%, virtually zero. However, under cold case protocol, a conclusion could not be announced with confirmation from only one laboratory. Whitaker therefore continued waiting for the federal lab results. While waiting, she organized the data. Michael's current age perfectly matched Jacob's age, if he were still alive. Michael's residence in Kansas aligned with the feasible travel direction of the truck that left Springfield in 1972. And every irregularity in Michael's personal documents fit the pattern of a child removed from the state under a false identity. 1 week later, the federal laboratory results arrived via encrypted mail. Genetic analysis indicates sibling relationship with probability exceeding 99.99%. Individual designated as sample B is a direct sibling of sample A. With 2 independent laboratories reaching near absolute conclusions, every legal requirement for identity verification had been satisfied. Whitaker sat in front of her screen and took a deep breath. Nearly 40 years after the 3-year-old boy vanished from his yard in Springfield, his identity had finally been confirmed. Michael Turner was Jacob Ward. The next step was to formally notify the National Missing Children Coordination Agency while preparing the report for the Springfield Police Department, where the case had begun in 1972. Whitaker sent the email per cold case protocol: positive identification confirmed. Missing child Jacob Ward located alive. Proceed with notification protocol. Upon receiving the notice, the Springfield PD captain called Whitaker for final verbal confirmation, and when she confirmed that both laboratories had affirmed the blood relationship, all he could say was, "Almost 40 years, and we finally found the boy." Meanwhile, Michael had not yet been told the official conclusion. He only knew his DNA sample was being tested in a federal process. When Whitaker contacted him to arrange an in-person meeting, he sensed something momentous was coming, but didn't dare get his hopes up. He asked, "Is there anything you can tell me right now?" Whitaker answered exactly according to regulations, "I'll tell you everything at the upcoming meeting. But I want you to prepare yourself, the results are life-changing." On Emily's side, when contacted to schedule the official notification meeting, she could not hide her trembling. For decades the Ward family had lived with emptiness and the faint hope that Jacob was still out there somewhere. When Whitaker said the results from both laboratories showed an almost absolute DNA match, Emily broke down sobbing and could only get out a few words. "My little brother is alive," Whitaker confirmed. "Yes, and his current name is Michael Turner." All the genetic testing, which had begun with Michael's own suspicions about his identity, had now become the final link that reconnected a journey severed in 1972. From a boy who vanished without a trace, to a young man raised with documents of unclear origin, to DNA results linking two lives that seemed unrelated, the Jacob Ward case had entered a new phase. No longer, where is Jacob? But how do we bring him back to his rightful place in his own life story? Immediately after the DNA conclusion confirmed Michael Turner was Jacob Ward, the next step in the cold case unit's investigation was to determine how the 3-year-old boy who disappeared from Springfield in 1972 ended up in Kansas under the care of Helen Turner. To clarify this, Detective Lauren Whitaker pulled the administrative adoption records for Helen from the early 1970s, a mandatory check in every case of legally transferred children. However, both Kansas and Missouri state records showed no adoption proceedings involving Helen between 1972 and 1974. The complete absence of any legal trail immediately raised a major red flag. If Michael was not her biological child, and Helen had never gone through an adoption agency, where had the boy come from? Whitaker and the federal investigators began reviewing Helen's residency records from the early 1970s. They determined that Helen moved to Wichita in late 1973, roughly 1 year after Jacob vanished. This timeline matched the moment Michael appeared in civil records, making it virtually certain that Helen was the person who personally brought Jacob to Kansas and registered him under a new identity. When invited in for questioning, Helen Turner appeared nervous but did not refuse. At nearly 70 years old, Helen entered the interview room, clutching an old purse and looking exhausted. Whitaker opened the session by clearly presenting the DNA results and stating, "We know Michael is not your biological son, and we need to know how the boy came to you." Helen sat silent for a long time, hands clasped tightly. For the first time in decades, she could no longer maintain the old story. She sighed and said softly, "I never thought what happened back then would ever come to light." Then she told her story. According to Helen, she had not been looking for a child to raise and was not part of any adoption network. She said that in 1973, while working part-time at a roadside diner in Kansas, a middle-aged stranger appeared with a child around 2 years old. The man said the child was the son of a friend who could no longer care for him, and that he was looking for someone to take the boy informally. She said, "The child hardly spoke, only clung to the man, and she could sense fear in his eyes." Helen, recently divorced, living alone, and longing for a child, softened. When Whitaker asked why she trusted the man, Helen lowered her head. "I know I was wrong, but at the time, I didn't think he was involved in anything terrible. I thought I was helping the child." According to Helen, the man provided no paperwork, only said, "Just love him, he needs a family." Helen took the child, paid a small amount the man called previous care expenses, and then he left and never reappeared. Whitaker slid the case folder toward her. "We need the most complete description possible of that man. This may be the first time in nearly 40 years we have direct information about the suspect." Helen closed her eyes trying to recall. She said the man was about 5'11", thin build, dark brown hair, long and gaunt face. He wore a gray canvas jacket and worn work boots. But the detail that caught Whitaker's attention most was what came next. "I remember his truck, an old light blue pickup with a long silver fade streak down the side, like the sun had bleached it." Whitaker immediately recognized this as the critical missing piece no one had known for decades. She asked Helen to describe further. Helen said it was a closed box bed truck. Very old, the blue paint faded patchily to silver on the left side. She remembered because when the man drove away, sunlight glinted off that faded streak and made her feel uneasy for reasons she couldn't explain. This was the first time in the case history that a witness had directly described a man connected to the child after the disappearance, something no Springfield witness statement had ever provided. The investigation file noted Helen's description matched in an uncanny way the truck data Whitaker had already analyzed. Ford models 1968, 1971, light blue paint, prone to silver fading, closed cargo box. When asked about the man's demeanor, Helen said he avoided eye contact, spoke very little, and seemed eager to leave. When she asked about the child's parents, he replied, "They can't take care of him. Don't ask any more questions." These short, evasive answers led Whitaker to note behavior characteristic of someone handing off a child illegally or attempting to sever all traces. When asked why she never reported it, Helen admitted she was afraid. "I knew what I did was wrong, and I was terrified that if I spoke up, they would take the child away from me." Although Helen's actions were legally wrong, Whitaker saw no evidence she participated in the abduction itself. Rather, she was merely the recipient from the actual perpetrator. But Helen's statement and description, the first in 39 years, finally created a portrait of a potential suspect. A middle-aged man present in Missouri in 1972 and Kansas in 1973, traveling in a light blue truck with a silver fade streak, likely a manual laborer and engaging in illegal child transfer, matching perfectly the stranger abductor profile Whitaker had built from behavioral analysis. For the first time since Jacob disappeared, the file was no longer based solely on guesses or indirect testimony. A direct witness had seen the person who took Jacob away, described the vehicle, the timing, and the child's condition. And most importantly, that description matched every remaining trace from 1972. With this information, the case moved into a genuine suspect hunt phase, something that had not happened in 40 years. Immediately after obtaining Helen Turner's direct description of the man who handed Jacob to her in 1973, Detective Lauren Whitaker entered the entire description into the potential suspect profiling system, combining it with data on the light blue truck with the silver fade streak that the team had already identified from the 1972 scene. The system instantly filtered to a list of more than 300 individuals who owned 1968, 1971 Ford trucks in the Missouri, Kansas area at the time, but only a small group met all criteria. Middle-aged males, traveling between Missouri and Kansas in the early 1970s, manual labor occupations, and temporary residents near Springfield. Digging deeper, only one name stood out as the intersection of every condition: Harold Jennings, born 1938, former road repair worker, seasonal laborer, and truck driver for a small materials distribution company in Missouri. Jennings had a scattered residency history, changed jobs multiple times in the 1960s, 1970s, and regularly traveled between Springfield, Joplin, and Wichita, exactly the corridor Whitaker had identified as consistent with the abduction travel pattern. The first step was to pull Jennings' movement history through administrative records from Missouri, Kansas, and Arkansas. The data showed he lived in Springfield from 1971 to early 1972, working for a road crew repairing pavement in Greene County, just a few miles from the Ward neighborhood. Most critically, Jennings disappeared from Springfield in the summer of 1972. The exact time Jacob went missing and reappeared in Wichita, Kansas, around late 1972, precisely when Helen said the stranger showed up at her diner. The sudden move with no clear job-related reason was the kind of red flag cold case files often flag as high risk. When Whitaker pulled Jennings' registered vehicle history, the picture became even more striking. His 1971 vehicle registration listed a 1969 Ford F-100, light blue, closed bed. The truck was sold in mid-1973, just months after he allegedly handed the child to Helen. This not only matched the 1973 witness description, but also explained why Springfield PD never located the truck. Jennings quickly swapped vehicles after using it in the crime. When cross-referencing the 1972 truck description from the two Springfield witnesses with Helen's 1973 account, Whitaker found an almost perfect match. According to Ford factory records, the light sky blue paint on 1968, 1971 models faded to gray-white in Midwest climate, especially on the side panels exposed to direct sun. That distinctive fade pattern was rare and highly recognizable, dramatically reducing the chance of mistaken vehicle identity. The next step was to examine Jennings' temporary residence records, traffic citations, and civil reports. Whitaker found 3 key items. 1. Jennings was ticketed for illegal parking in a Springfield residential neighborhood the month before Jacob disappeared. 2. A 1970 Kansas report noted Jennings as a suspect for approaching children in a park, though evidence was insufficient for arrest. 3. A 1973 Arkansas citation for stopping near a residential area with small children at night. Although each incident alone was insufficient for charges, the behavioral pattern perfectly fit the stranger abductor profile, approaching children in low traffic areas, crossing state lines, no fixed residence, and appearing in neighborhoods without clear reason. Further review of Jennings' employment records showed several sudden quits without notice. In 1972, on the exact day of the abduction, the Springfield Road Crew timesheet showed Jennings absent that morning, with no recorded excuse, creating a complete time window that coincided with Jacob's disappearance. Whitaker immediately flagged this as a high-level suspicious time gap. Expanding the search to residency records, the team located a cheap motel registration for Jennings in Wichita in December 1972, less than a 10-minute drive from Helen's diner. This reinforced the likelihood that Jennings did not hand off the child randomly, but had crossed state lines with the specific intent of severing all ties to Missouri. Digging deeper, Whitaker discovered an old internal complaint from a former supervisor about Jennings' inappropriate staring at children at a job site where workers sometimes brought their kids. The report had remained internal and never became a criminal file. This was the type of minor scattered red flag seen in many pre-1980 sad child abductions. Predators often displayed small warning signs over years before committing a major crime. To rule out coincidental name matches, Whitaker cross-checked multiple data layers: date of birth, temporary addresses, driver's license number, citation receipts, vehicle history, and Helen's description details. Every piece of data, from different systems, different years, different states, converged on one conclusion. Jennings was in Springfield in 1972, owned a matching vehicle, had an unexplained absence the morning of the abduction, reappeared in Kansas exactly when Jacob was handed off, and sold the suspect truck immediately afterward. The investigators scored Jennings on the cold case suspect probability scale, which requires at least 4 major matches for high priority designation. Jennings scored 8 out of 8. 1 matches physical description, 2 matches vehicle description, 3 present in area before crime, 4 interstate flight immediately after, 5 prior child approach behavior, 6 time gap on day of disappearance, 7 present in Kansas at child handoff, 8 sold suspect vehicle to erase trail. With that level of correlation, Jennings was no longer merely a potential suspect, he became the highest probability suspect in the entire case history. When Whitaker finalized the report, she wrote the concluding line, "Harold Jennings meets every threshold required for primary suspect designation. No other candidate presents comparable correlation." After nearly 40 years, the Jacob Ward case finally had a specific name: Harold Jennings. The marginal man who moved between states, owned the light blue truck with the silver fade, and was most likely the person who took a 3-year-old boy on a journey of disappearance that lasted nearly half a century. Immediately after Harold Jennings was identified as the highest probability suspect, the next step in Detective Lauren Whitaker's investigation plan was to locate every place Jennings had lived or stayed during 1972. 1973, in order to determine whether any evidence or traces related to his holding Jacob prior to handing the child over to Helen Turner still existed. Using motel records, traffic tickets, and demographic data, Whitaker and the cold case unit determined that Jennings had stayed at least 3 locations: a workers' boarding house in Springfield before the abduction, a rented warehouse near Joplin where he worked seasonally, and a cheap motel in Wichita where his registered stay exactly matched the time Jacob appeared in Kansas. Of the 3 sites, the Wichita location had the highest likelihood of still retaining traces because, according to property tax records, the building had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, but never demolished. That made it an ideal candidate: no human activity, minimal structural changes, and the possibility that items or traces from the 1970s remained. Whitaker quickly prepared the paperwork for a search warrant. The grounds for the warrant included: 1. Jennings was the prime suspect in the 1972 abduction. 2. He had used this location at a time immediately adjacent to the events. 3. The high probability that valuable investigative evidence still existed, especially in cold cases where small items or ancient DNA traces can survive in a naturally protected environment. A federal judge approved the warrant within 48 hours, aided by Jennings' strong record of connection to serious criminal conduct and the fact that the building was ownerless property with no legal disputes. Upon arriving in Wichita, Whitaker coordinated with the Wichita Police Department and a forensic field team to plan the approach to the motel. The 3-story red brick building sat beside an old highway. Every window was boarded up with rotting plywood, the sign had fallen away, and only faint peeling paint remained that once read Harper Lodge. The first floor had partially collapsed at the rear. The second floor was relatively intact. The third floor was heavily damaged, but still cautiously accessible. According to 1972 records, Jennings had rented room 212 on the second floor. The forensic team set up floodlights, identified a safe entry point, and began processing under strict cold case preservation protocol. No bare-hand contact with surfaces, no shaking of the structure, and no movement of objects until panoramic photographs were taken. Upon entering the second-floor hallway, everyone immediately noticed the thick, undisturbed dust that had accumulated over decades, with no footprints or large drag marks, indicating the building had seen very little intrusion. The door to room 212 was still in place, though rotted, and the lock was so rusted it could not be picked, forcing the team to use a specialized cutting tool while preserving the hinges so as not to destroy the surrounding wood frame. When the door swung open, a wave of musty odor rolled out, and floodlights illuminated a small room of roughly 12 square meters. Inside remained several items: a warped wooden wardrobe, a metal chair, a rusted bed frame, and a thin wooden box pushed into the corner. Notably, the space showed no recent signs of homeless occupancy, an unusual situation for abandoned buildings, which dramatically increased the likelihood that older evidence remained intact. Whitaker ordered the team to establish a static scene before anything was moved. The walls showed several rectangular fade marks, indicating pictures or objects had once hung there for years. The wooden floor was rotted in patches, but some areas showed only light dust disturbance, likely from insects or rodents rather than humans. What drew Whitaker's attention most was the wooden box in the corner. It was far less water damaged than the other items, meaning it had either been placed there later or positioned in a spot less affected by the passage of time. The team scanned the box's surface with oblique lighting and found dust layers consistent with the passage of decades, but no fresh fingerprints. Inside the box they recovered several old items: a folded road map of Missouri, a rusted knife, a coil of cloth cord, and a newspaper fragment that had almost completely disintegrated. The newspaper, barely legible to the naked eye, was carefully placed by Whitaker into a preservation sleeve for later image enhancement processing. On the bed frame, The team located an extremely small fiber caught on a metal corner. The fiber was recovered with sterile tweezers and preserved under ancient DNA protocol, even though genetic material was not guaranteed. In cold cases, any fiber can hold value. Additionally, beneath a floorboard near the window, a technician discovered a broken fingernail covered in thick dust but still intact in shape. This was the type of evidence modern cases can yield DNA from if any cellular material remains. The sample was sealed immediately. The wall also bore a long scratch mark of unknown origin. The team used 3D scanning to document the scratch structure before deciding whether to remove a wood sample. Once the room was fully scanned, Whitaker stepped back into the hallway and looked again at the door to room 212. The building had been decaying for nearly half a century, yet this small room might still hold the information Jennings left behind when he departed. Wichita in 1973, the moment he handed the child to Helen, and now, for the first time since 1972, investigators were not only chasing traces at the original scene, but entering a place Jennings had lived, hidden, and possibly kept Jacob before disappearing from Missouri. Finding the room essentially untouched did not just open a new physical investigative avenue. It reinforced the belief that Harold Jennings was not merely the highest probability suspect, he was the key piece to understanding Jacob's entire journey in the days after he was taken from the Ward family's front yard. Immediately after leaving the old Wichita motel with the newly collected evidence box, Detective Lauren Whitaker transported every sample to the Cold Case Unit laboratory for in-depth analysis. The evidence was divided into three main groups: the small fabric fiber stuck to the bed frame, the hair sample recovered near the base of the wall, and paint chips taken from the window frame of room 212. Each group carried different potential, and although no one dared predict their actual value, after nearly 4 decades, Whitaker knew any surviving trace could become a critical link. The first item processed was the small fiber from the bed frame. Its shape and color led technicians to suspect it might be from children's clothing, given the soft material, fine thread size, and weave pattern typical of 1970s children's garments. The fiber was examined under optical microscopy, then subjected to infrared spectroscopy for polymer identification. Results showed it was cotton polyester blend, a material extremely common in early 1970s children's clothing. When compared to fabric samples provided by Jacob's parents in 1972, the weave pattern from room 212 matched the pattern of a common children's shirt sold in Missouri that year. Though not absolute identification, the forensic team marked the compatibility level as high, especially since the fiber appeared in a location Jennings occupied at the exact time Jacob was handed to Helen. The second item, the hair sample, was considered far more significant. The hair lay near the corner of the room, trapped between layers of old dust, proving it was not left by modern intruders. The sample consisted of 2 strands, one long strand with root and one short strand without. This allowed technicians to use 2 methods: nuclear DNA analysis on the rooted strand and mitochondrial DNA on the rootless one. The rooted strand underwent ancient DNA extraction protocol. After many hours, a surprising result emerged. The sample produced a DNA signal matching the Y chromosome and genetic profile consistent with Michael Turner's reference sample in the cold case database. The match exceeded 99%, meaning the hair very likely belonged to Jacob before he was given to Helen Turner. When Whitaker read the report, she paused for a long time. This was the first physical evidence in nearly 40 years, proving Jacob had been present in room 212, where Jennings stayed. The second strand was analyzed for mitochondrial DNA and showed complete mismatch with Jacob's, making it highly probable it belonged to Jennings. This not only reinforced that Jennings had been in the room, but confirmed physical interaction between him and the child. 2 hairs in the same space, under the same layer of decades-old dust, were a powerful indicator that Jacob had not merely been brought to Wichita, but had actually stayed in that very room. The third item, the paint chips, was expected to create a bridge between the motel and the 1972 Springfield scene. The chips taken from Jennings' window frame had two layers, an inner pale blue and an outer faded silver blue. XRF spectroscopy identified lead, titanium, and pigments used in Ford vehicle paint from 1968, 1971. The exact make and model Jennings owned, and the same type of vehicle witnesses in Springfield described seeing outside the Ward home. Whitaker cross-referenced the chips with wheel well dust collected in 1972, which had previously been deemed insufficient for analysis due to the limitations of 1970s equipment. Using modern technology, the lab reanalyzed the old dust and discovered microscopic blue-silver paint particles whose pigment composition matched the Room 212 chips almost perfectly. This was a near miraculous breakthrough, two pieces of evidence separated by nearly 40 years and two different states, linked by the exact same vehicle paint. The technical report stated clearly the probability that the two paint samples originate from the same vehicle reaches a very high threshold. When the three evidence groups were combined, the picture became clearer than ever before. The children's fabric fiber matched clothing from the period Jacob disappeared. The rooted hair matched Jacob's DNA. The vehicle paint matched traces from the Springfield scene. Whitaker compiled all results and presented them to the cold case unit director. The report concluded, evidence from room 212 proves Jacob Ward was present at Harold Jennings' residence in late 1972. Simultaneously, the vehicle paint sample indicates a high probability that Jennings used the same vehicle present at the abduction scene. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, the investigating agency had solid physical evidence directly linking a specific suspect, Harold Jennings, to the Jacob Ward abduction scene. What had once been hypothesis had now crossed into the realm of confirmation. Jennings was not merely the person who delivered Jacob to Helen Turner. He was the one who took the boy out of Missouri, using the very pickup truck seen at the scene, and kept Jacob in room 212 before disappearing from legal view. With that conclusion, the Jacob Ward case moved into the phase of criminal prosecution against Jennings, whether he was still alive or not. Immediately after the evidence from room 212 of the Wichita motel was confirmed to match both Jacob's DNA and material from the 1972 Springfield scene, Detective Lauren Whitaker's next task was to reconstruct Harold Jennings' complete timeline of actions at the highest possible level of detail. The goal was to recreate the entire chain of events from the moment Jennings first appeared in Springfield, surveilled the Ward family, executed Jacob's abduction, fled Missouri, traveled to Kansas, and finally handed the child to Helen Turner. This was the first time since 1972 that investigators had sufficient physical, administrative, and witness data to connect all the pieces into a seamless picture. Whitaker began with the earliest phase surveillance, based on multiple Springfield witnesses describing a pale blue pickup truck driving slowly around the Ward neighborhood on consecutive days, combined with digitized mapping frequency analysis. Jennings had been in the area on at least 3 mornings between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. The exact window when the Ward family routinely let the 2 children play in the front yard. Jennings' road repair crew schedule also showed he had flexible hours and often passed through residential routes to inspect pavement or transport materials, giving him cover to observe the target without drawing attention. From this, Whitaker established the initial phase, surveillance. Jennings had ample opportunity to learn the Ward family routine, Daniel working in the backyard in the mornings, Mary usually in the kitchen, Emily and Jacob playing in the front yard. The gate unlocked, a quiet neighborhood, with few people noticing strangers. These were all the conditions an experienced stranger abductor would exploit. Whitaker then reconstructed the approach phase. Based on Emily's statement and witnesses who heard a vehicle slow down, Jennings drove his pale blue Ford F-100 up to the Ward house and stopped for a few seconds, just as Mary turned back to the kitchen and Daniel was in the rear yard. Emily was the only one who saw a man standing outside the gate, but the distance was too great for identification. This was a critical timestamp, approximately 9:07, 9:10 a.m. Given the distance from the truck to where Jacob stood and behavioral timing models from similar child abductions, Jennings needed only 10-15 seconds to scoop Jacob up and return to the vehicle. Because the truck had an enclosed cargo bed, concealing the child happened almost instantly. The later discovery of Jacob's hair in Jennings' room showed Jacob sustained no injury at the scene, supporting the theory that the suspect acted quickly, decisively, and without giving the victim time to resist. Next, Whitaker reconstructed the abduction and exit from Springfield phase. Witnesses heard the engine rev between 9:12 and 9:13, consistent with tire tracks that were deeper where the truck had stopped and gradually faded southwest, the route out of the neighborhood onto Maplewood. 1972 analysis had shown the only escape direction that was open and matched the timeline led to Highway 60, allowing Jennings to leave Springfield in 6-8 minutes. Whitaker ran a modern mapping software simulation using realistic 1972 truck speeds. The results showed Jennings could reach the edge of Springfield in 12-15 minutes, perfectly matching the period before patrol units could set up roadblocks. This explained why the 1972 Springfield PD found no vehicle traces within a 5-mile radius. Jennings was outside the search perimeter within the first few minutes. Whitaker then reconstructed the travel to Kansas phase. Residency records and traffic tickets placed Jennings in Wichita by December 1972, but fragmented data suggested he may have stayed temporarily in central Missouri or the Kansas City area in the intervening months. His lack of employment records during this period made flexible movement even more likely. Crucially, Jennings filed no change of residency forms during this window, classic avoidance behavior for an abductor. When the time frame of Jennings leaving Springfield was aligned with his reappearance in Wichita records, the timeline perfectly matched Jacob's age when Helen encountered him in 1973. The child was roughly 2 years old, quiet, frightened, and completely dependent, exactly as Helen described. Next, Whitaker rebuilt the handoff to Helen Turner phase. According to Helen's statement, Jennings appeared at the roadside diner where she worked. Her description of Jacob's demeanor, silent, not crying, clinging to the man, matched the reaction of a child, separated from everything familiar for an extended period. By 1973, Jacob was nearing 3 years old and unable to articulate much about his origins, further assuring Jennings the boy could not reveal anything. Jennings accepting a small amount of money from Helen and leaving immediately also fit the pattern of a perpetrator trying to sever all ties. Finally, Whitaker cross-checked the entire timeline against real-world data. The pale blue truck sightings matched. The disappearance window matched the gap in Jennings' work attendance records. The escape route matched map analysis. Jennings' appearance in Wichita matched the moment Jacob entered the Kansas system under a new identity. Evidence in room 212 confirmed Jennings kept Jacob before the handoff. Upon completion, Whitaker wrote in her report, Jennings' timeline matches 100% of the Jacob Ward abduction events. There are no contradictions, and no other suspect fits the entire sequence of actions. For the first time, not only physical evidence, but the behavioral timeline had fused into a unified model, bringing the case closer to the full truth than at any point since 1972. Right after completing the action timeline of Harold Jennings and establishing that Michael Turner was in fact Jacob Ward, the victim abducted in 1972, Detective Lauren Whitaker had to transfer the entire case file to the next legal phase. Preparation for the formal identification process and reunion procedures. A complex protocol that had never before been applied to a case spanning nearly 4 decades. Although the DNA results had already confirmed the blood relationship, the law required multiple additional steps to legalize Jacob's identity, update civil records, and ensure the legal rights of both the Ward family and Michael Jacob. The first step was federal standard identity verification for long-term missing persons who have been located. Whitaker had to prove that Michael Turner not only had a DNA match, but also met non-genetic identification factors, estimated year of birth, physical characteristics, medical factors, and consistent historical data. Jacob Ward's 1972 medical records noted a small birthmark under his left shoulder blade. When Whitaker contacted Michael to check, he confirmed he had a faint mark in the same location that he had always assumed was an old childhood scar. Photographs of the mark were sent to the Missouri State Medical Examiner, and the evaluation concluded that the location, size, and pigment structure were consistent with a congenital birthmark that had faded over time. This matched Jacob's record and added authenticity beyond the DNA evidence. The next step was to examine the administrative elements surrounding the identity of Michael Turner. A delayed birth certificate, no hospital birth record, no vaccination records before age 2, and a late-issued Social Security number were all listed as indicators of a late-established identity, a pattern commonly seen in cases of missing children raised illicitly. The lack of proof of birthplace had been a long-standing gap that the Kansas administrative system had once accepted, but it now became critical data supporting the fact that Michael had no origin matching Helen Turner's claims. When Whitaker presented this complete file to the Federal Review Panel, the conclusion came back after 1 week. Michael Turner met sufficient identification factors to be recognized as Jacob Ward under the multi-factor identity confirmation standard. This cleared the way for the next legal stage, supplementation and amendment of civil records. Because Michael's true identity was Jacob Ward, civil agencies were required to update the Social Security record, correct the year of birth, place of birth, and all vital records, reinstate Jacob's missing person file, and change the status to located alive, create a legal identity change record. This process required close coordination between Kansas and Missouri administrative agencies, since Jacob had been raised, educated, and employed in Kansas, but was born and abducted in Missouri. The two states signed a special interstate cooperation agreement to handle a rare case, a missing child confirmed alive nearly 4 decades after the incident. At the same time, Whitaker worked with the Missouri PD to prepare the official notification to the Ward family. As soon as the DNA conclusion received secondary confirmation, she arranged a private meeting with Emily Ward and family representatives. Emily already strongly suspected Michael was Jacob, but this meeting was the first official legal notification where the full conclusion and supporting documents were presented. Emily burst into tears the moment she saw the line, DNA comparison, 99.999% full sibling match. In that moment, after nearly 40 years of waiting and pain, the Ward family finally heard something they had thought would never happen: Jacob was alive. But to move toward an official reunion, the investigation needed cooperation from the Kansas PD, since Jacob Michael resided within their jurisdiction, and any approach to him had to follow personal protection protocols. Detective Whitaker contacted Kansas PD and explained that Michael was neither a suspect nor a criminal witness, but the victim of the 1972 abduction. Kansas PD agreed to assist and sent 2 officers to meet Michael prior to the formal session, not for interrogation, but to ensure his psychological safety when receiving the information. In parallel, Whitaker contacted Missouri's Victim Support Center to prepare psychological assistance, because discovering one was a kidnapping victim and had lived under a false identity one's entire life could cause severe shock. The reunion preparation process also required an in-person identity verification session, although no additional testing was mandatory. This is typically done to support a stable psychological transition for both family and victim. Kansas PD arranged a private room at their headquarters where Whitaker, Ward family representatives, and a counselor would meet Michael. Before the meeting, Emily sent a short letter through Whitaker, but per protocol, Michael could only read it after hearing the full official disclosure. During this period, Missouri authorities also had to finalize closure of the missing person file, convert it to a reunion file, and notify the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This was especially important because the Jacob Ward case had been on the National Missing Persons list, and all data had to be updated to prevent future confusion. One final step before the reunion was to clarify Michael's wishes. He had the right to keep the name Michael Turner, legally change it back to Jacob Ward, or use both. He also had to be informed of his legal rights regarding pursuit of accountability against Jennings or recording legal consequences if Jennings was deceased. This information had to be presented objectively, without pressure. When all legal procedures were confirmed, DNA, identity, civil records, interstate coordination, psychological preparation, Whitaker was finally able to schedule the event. The Jacob Ward case had waited 40 years for the official reunion between Jacob and the Ward family. But before that door opened, one very human moment still lay ahead. Michael Turner would have to hear the true story of his life and decide whether he was ready to step into a new life with the old name that had been stolen from him at age 3. The reunion was scheduled for a July morning in 2011 in a secure conference room at Kansas PD, where every legal and psychological support measure had been meticulously prepared. When Michael Turner walked in, Detective Lauren Whitaker was already seated with Kansas PD representatives and a victim support specialist. A long silence hung in the air before Whitaker began the direct in-person identity confirmation protocol, presentation of DNA results, comparison of identification characteristics, verification of personal history factors, and delivery of the official written conclusion. Michael listened, hands clenched, trying to stay composed as Whitaker stated clearly, "You are Jacob Ward. You went missing in 1972. Your family never stopped looking for you." Those words left Michael barely able to breathe. The doubts he had carried for years, the lifelong feeling of not belonging, were suddenly explained by a truth he had never imagined. He had not simply been hidden, he had been torn from his birth family at the age of 3. After the disclosure portion, Whitaker invited Emily Ward, who had been waiting outside per protocol, to enter the room. In the moment the two siblings faced each other after 53 years, no one could speak. Emily tremblingly raised a hand to her mouth, while Michael stood frozen, as if afraid to believe it was real. Then Emily softly said his name, "Jacob," and as if some deep memory responded, Michael's eyes filled with tears as he answered, "I don't remember, but I know it's you." This was the direct in-person identity confirmation required in cold case reunions to reinforce DNA and records with the emotional reactions of the parties involved. Notably, although Michael had no childhood memories, Emily immediately recognized the same eyes and facial features from the little boy she once knew. The support specialist recorded both individuals' emotional responses as consistent with long-interrupted blood relative reunion. Following the recognition phase, the legal team moved to the next step, formally returning Jacob to his family under legal procedure. This was not transfer of guardianship in the juvenile sense, but restoration of Jacob's personal and legal rights as a member of the Ward family. Documents read aloud included the legal identity conclusion, confirmation of termination of missing person status in national records, updated blood relation entries, and the list of rights Jacob gained upon identity restoration. Jacob was entitled to request a new birth certificate, re-register Social Security information under his true name, and receive all legal documents a citizen born in Missouri should have had. The Ward family was granted full access to the case file, confirmation of first-degree kinship, and the right to request Missouri state assistance in Jacob's identity transition. Emily signed the acknowledgement of identity acceptance. Michael, now addressed by both names, Michael Turner and Jacob Ward, signed the consent for civil record amendment to restore his lost identity. This step was critical. Only with the victim's agreement could state agencies update official records. A Missouri state representative joined remotely to witness the process, since Jacob remained a legal Missouri resident despite having lived nearly his entire life in Kansas. After all signatures were complete, Whitaker read the final declaration. Under Missouri state law and national NCIC records, Jacob Ward, missing since June 23, 1972, is hereby confirmed alive and returned to his family. This marked the official end of a 39-year missing person case. Kansas PD immediately closed the file. Michael Turner, identity status undetermined, and transferred all data to Jacob Ward, identity restored. In such exceptional cases, record correction is not merely paperwork. It involves resolving identity conflict across federal systems, including Social Security, IRS, medical records, and educational records. All relevant agencies were notified that Michael Turner is in fact Jacob Ward, but is permitted to retain Michael as a secondary legal name if desired. A new vital record was created in Missouri, listing Jacob David Ward, born October 14, 1969, the true birth date based on the 1972 Springfield hospital record. The name Michael Turner was entered in the section name used during Kansas residency period. This ensured Jacob's legal rights during the transition to his correct identity, while preserving his life history in Kansas to avoid personal conflicts. At the same time, Missouri state records were comprehensively updated. The missing child file was changed to located alive. The criminal investigation file was updated in preparation for pursuing suspect Harold Jennings. The Ward family civil file was supplemented with Jacob's return. The Missouri representative extended official thanks to Kansas PD for their assistance in verification and protection of Michael Jacob during this sensitive phase. At the end of the session, Emily approached her brother once more. With no remaining legal formalities or procedures in the way, only two people who had been separated for more than half a century remained. Emily placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder and said through tears, "You always belong to us." Jacob, voice breaking, replied, "Thank you, sis, for never giving up on me." And so, after 53 years, since the moment that faded green and silver pickup truck stopped in front of the Ward home in 1972, the little boy Jacob was finally home, not only legally, but in the hearts of his family. After the official reunion and approval of all legal procedures, Jacob Ward's post-reunion integration process began, a process requiring federal, state, and specialized professional coordination across multiple fields. Citizen identity adjustment had to be handled carefully because Jacob's life for over 40 years had been built under the name Michael Turner. Employment, banking, insurance, and medical records were all tied to that identity. Missouri allowed Jacob to retain Michael as a secondary legal name, but restoring the original name Jacob Ward was necessary to reconnect records interrupted since 1972. The first step was updating the identity record at the Social Security Administration. A special confirmation from the Cold Case Unit enabled the agency to create a new entry linking Michael Turner's Social Security number to the true name Jacob Ward, with the clear notation, "Missing person victim identified, identity restored." This ensured Jacob would not be treated as a brand new individual administratively and could continue receiving retirement, employment, and insurance benefits based on his prior work history. Next came restoration of financial records. Jacob's bank had to perform dual identity verification, cross-referencing the legal conclusions from Missouri and Kansas PD. Bank accounts, transaction history, loans, and credit records were all updated under both names to ensure the transition caused no financial disruption. This was a rare procedure. The bank representative noted they had handled only a handful of similar cases in 30 years, mostly long-term missing persons or major administrative errors. Medical records also required adjustment. Since Michael Turner had received treatment at numerous Kansas facilities, all charts and prescriptions were under that name. When the state health system synchronized records, they created a merged file, attaching all past data to the new identity. Some hospitals required Jacob to sign affidavits, confirming he was the person in the old records, necessary to prevent future medical errors. Physicians were also advised to monitor Jacob's mental health for at least 1 year post-reunion, as the impact of learning one was a childhood kidnapping victim can affect emotional stability and life adjustment. Concurrent with administrative procedures was a long-term psychological counseling program for victims of prolonged missing person cases. Missouri's Victim Support Unit arranged sessions in both Wichita and Springfield so Jacob could choose the most convenient location. Experts explained that adults who discover they were abducted as small children typically go through 3 psychological phases: shock, adjustment, identity reconstruction. Jacob admitted he felt as though 2 lives were colliding, the life he had lived as Michael Turner and the life he should have had as Jacob Ward. Counselors helped him process this loss of foundation, emphasizing that having two identity components was not inherently conflicting and could be integrated over time. To support integration, Missouri PD and Kansas PD coordinated a series of controlled meetings between Jacob and Emily, ensuring emotional distance sufficient to avoid overwhelming Jacob. They initially met in counseling offices, then progressed to coffee shops, and eventually Emily's home when Jacob felt ready. The Ward family also received separate counseling to learn how to support Jacob without pressuring rapid emotional reconnection. Another key issue was how Jacob would handle daily life with the new citizen identity. He had to remember to use both legal names, Jacob Ward on important legal documents and Michael Turner in existing social relationships. At work, he was allowed to continue using Michael, but the company had to update personnel files according to the new legal conclusion. The process took several weeks and multiple meetings, but his employer was supportive, understanding this was not a voluntary change, but the consequence of a childhood crime. Meanwhile, the Kansas community where he lived was given only limited information per privacy requirements. They were told Michael had a legal identity adjustment due to administrative correction. Preventing widespread disclosure was essential to shield Jacob from media pressure and outsiders. After 3 months, most administrative changes were complete. Jacob held a new birth certificate, new ID, a merged medical record, and federal guidelines on using dual legal names in different situations. The final and most important element was his gradual acceptance that his life now carried a different meaning. No longer just Michael Turner, the ordinary man from Kansas, but Jacob Ward, the missing person victim found after 53 years, and a living witness to a journey that neither the justice system nor the Ward family had ever abandoned. Once Michael Turner's true identity was officially restored, as Jacob Ward and post-reunion integration began to stabilize, news of the case rapidly spread beyond Missouri and Kansas, becoming a national media focus across the United States. Major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, all ran stories on this extremely rare case, a boy abducted in 1972 found alive, after 53 years, thanks to genealogy DNA technology and the persistence of the cold case unit. Initial reports emphasized what the public found hardest to believe, that for more than half a century, Jacob had lived under a completely different identity without any knowledge of his true origins. This made the story shocking and tapped into the deepest fears of families who had lost children. Morning news programs invited forensic experts, behavioral analysts, and former investigators to discuss how a kidnapping could remain buried for decades and only be solved by next-generation DNA. Media paid special attention to Detective Lauren Whitaker, who had digitized old files, reconstructed the timeline, and connected pieces that seemed scattered in a forgotten case. Soon afterward, in-depth articles appeared about cold case procedures, showing that, contrary to popular belief, decades-old missing person cases can still be resolved when modern technology and investigative methods are properly applied. Some journalists called it the gold standard in resolving long-dormant files, combining genetic genealogy, classic behavioral analysis, re-examination of old physical evidence with new technology, and proactive use of federal databases. Public interest surged when national news aired Emily Ward's interview. No one who heard it could forget the moment she said, "If anyone out there is still looking for a missing child, please don't give up. I looked for my brother for 53 years. That quote spread rapidly across social media, creating a new wave of attention to missing person cases from the 1970s, 1990s, an era when investigative technology was severely limited. Jacob's discovery prompted thousands of families with missing relatives to contact local police and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMAC, hoping their loved ones' files would be re-examined using genetic genealogy or digitization. Within 3 months of the Jacob Ward story breaking, Missouri PD recorded more than 200 cold case review requests from citizens in the state alone. NCMA saw a 40% plus increase in families asking to update missing child files, submit DNA samples, or add genealogy data. Many families had never believed DNA technology could offer them hope, until they saw a 1972 abduction solved in 2011. Specialized forensic journals published analyses explaining how law enforcement's use of commercial DNA databases had become a powerful tool for identifying both victims and sometimes perpetrators. Jacob's story helped the public understand that genetic genealogy is not just a service for finding relatives, but a method for unlocking mysteries decades old. Another effect emerged. Law enforcement agencies nationwide held internal workshops to re-examine cold cases involving child abductions from the 1960s, 1990s. The reason was that the Jacob Ward model revealed an important truth. Many missing child cases may not have been intra-family crimes as once assumed, but the work of mobile predatory abductors like Harold Jennings. This shift in understanding produced a major change in investigative approach. Instead of over-focusing on parents or relatives, cold case units began re-screening vehicle data, behavioral patterns, and cross-state movement of potential suspects. Alongside the media spread, concern grew for the Ward family and the agencies protecting Jacob. Public attention can help cold cases, but it can also create psychological pressure on Jacob, who was still adjusting his identity and accepting the truth about his origins. Therefore, Missouri PD limited release of detailed personal information, only confirming that Jacob was safe and receiving integration support. Some media outlets attempted to reach Jacob, but he declined public appearances at that time. He wanted to understand himself before stepping into a story the entire country was following hour by hour. Nevertheless, the fact that the Jacob Ward case became a national focal point carried great meaning. It proved that no missing person case is ever truly too old to be solved, and that scientific advances, DNA, digitization, federal data cross-matching, can completely change the fate of a person thought to have been forgotten forever. Jacob became a symbol of hope, and his case became evidence of a phrase the media repeated often. Cold case does not mean unsolvable. The intense national media coverage of the Jacob Ward case not only sparked public interest, but also provided the impetus for federal agencies to examine whether the 1972 abduction was an isolated incident. As Harold Jennings' file was analyzed in greater depth, the FBI began to question whether Jennings was merely a lone abductor or a link in a larger network operating between 1965 and 1975, a period when a series of unsolved child disappearances occurred across the Midwest. The FBI requested that Missouri's cold case unit transfer all documents related to Jennings, including his travel patterns, occupations, cases in which he had been a suspect, and the locations where he had resided. Initial analyses revealed that Jennings traveled far more than initially believed. Beyond Missouri and Kansas, records showed he had short stays in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee during periods when scattered disappearances took place. This gave rise to the hypothesis that Jennings may have approached, stalked, or even participated in multiple abductions beyond Jacob's. The FBI opened its archives of child disappearances from 1965 to 1975 and screened them using 3 criteria that matched the Jacob Ward case. The victim vanished near home within minutes. There were no signs of forced entry or violence, and a green vehicle, or one with an unclear license plate, was seen around the time of the disappearance. The results revealed at least 6 cases with similar patterns in 3 neighboring states. 2 cases in particular, one in Oklahoma in 1970 and one in Arkansas in 1974, stood out. In both, witnesses described a middle-aged man driving an old light green enclosed pickup truck, a description that matched Jennings' vehicle to an alarming degree. In another Arkansas case, police records documented the description given by a little girl who survived an attempted approach. The stranger was thin, long-faced with brown hair, features that matched Jennings' 1972 employment ID photo. These successive coincidences were impossible for the FBI to ignore. A behavioral analysis team at Quantico was assigned to review Jennings' file as a possible serial offender. According to criminal profiling models, child abductors with a possessory motive often operate in cycles, especially when they move between states with temporary jobs like Jennings, jobs that allowed him to blend in and leave no long-term trace. The behavioral team compared the dates Jennings appeared in residency records with the dates of the disappearances. Preliminary findings showed that in 4 cases, Jennings was within a 50 to 100-mile radius at the exact time. This was not enough to charge him, but sufficient to place Jennings on the person of great interest list in 3 states. The FBI also examined the possibility of an illegal child trafficking ring because the cold, detached way Jennings handed Jacob over to Helen Turner, with no paperwork or demands, led many investigators to wonder whether he had ever delivered other children to other people. The late 1960s to early 1970s was a peak period for illegal adoption networks in the Midwest, in which stolen children were moved across state lines and placed with infertile couples. Although no direct evidence yet existed, Jennings' behavior fit the profile of a transporter in such networks, especially since he had no clear financial motive, never ransomed the child, and never kept the child long-term. The FBI began comparing the Jacob case to other disappearances with similar characteristics: children aged 2 to 5, taken near home, gone within minutes, and no signs of violence. The investigative team compiled a list of 14 cases between 1965 and 1975 in Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee that shared these elements. In 6 of them, the suspect vehicle was a light-colored truck or pickup. In 3, witness statements described a man who was tall, thin, with brown hair. Most strikingly, in 2 cases the vehicle was described as having silver streaking, a rare matching detail that only a fading paint Ford like Jennings would exhibit. From this data, the FBI launched the Midwest Child Abduction Review Project, a new initiative to re-examine every unsolved child disappearance in the Midwest, from the mid-1960s through the 1980s. The goal was not only to assess Jennings' role, but also to determine whether a network or group of offenders with similar behavior and methods existed. Forensic experts analyzed paint samples from multiple old cases and compared them with 1970s industrial paint data. Behavioral scientists studied victim approach patterns, travel habits, and criminal signatures. Another team reviewed employment records to see whether any of Jennings' co-workers or supervisors had traveled to the disappearance locations at the same times. This expansion of the investigation further heightened public interest. Families who had been waiting decades began sending letters, emails, and even their own DNA samples to police agencies, hoping for a fresh review. It demonstrated that the national impact of the Jacob Ward case went far beyond reuniting one victim after 53 years. It triggered a large-scale investigative process that could shed light on many other cold cases in the region. Although no final conclusion has been reached, the FBI noted in its preliminary report, the Jacob Ward case is likely one link in a chain of unsolved child abductions in the Midwest. Harold Jennings is a significant suspect who requires continued federal scrutiny. What began as a family tragedy in 1972 has become the catalyst for a sweeping federal investigation, with the hope of finally providing answers to families who have waited decades. After the investigation expanded nationwide and Jacob Ward's true identity was restored, the long-term impact on the Ward family became clearer month by month. It was not simply the return of a relative missing for 53 years. It was a process of the family having to readjust records, legal rights, and an emotional structure that had shifted many times over the decades. The first step the Ward family had to take was to update all family records, because in the eyes of the law, Jacob had never been declared deceased or located. His file had simply remained in missing person status for nearly half a century. When the Missouri PD officially closed the missing person case, the family had to re-enter personal data, update the family tree, and document the entire legal journey for future administrative needs. Emily became the family's representative, working with the Vital Records Office, resubmitting old documents still kept from 1972, Jacob's original birth certificate, the missing person report, search records, and even letters their parents had sent police while they were still alive. Completing the records was not only a legal necessity, it was the family's way of documenting a search that lasted more than half a century, so future generations would understand that Jacob did not disappear because the family gave up, but because they persisted until the end of their lives. Another major issue that arose was the adjustment of legal relationships, specifically inheritance. Because Jacob's parents had died many years earlier, their wills had been drafted at a time when they believed Jacob could never return. Missouri required the family's attorney to review the wills and estate records to determine Jacob's inheritance rights under the law. In many states, when a long-missing person is later found, all legal rights must be restored to ensure fairness to the victim. In Jacob's case, although most of the parents' assets had already been distributed to Emily and other relatives, the law allowed the family to renegotiate privately or ask a court to issue an adjustment order. Emily proactively offered Jacob a symbolic portion of the inheritance to reflect that he remained a family member, but Jacob refused any financial benefit. He told the attorney clearly, "I don't want to change what Mom and Dad left for my sister. I just want to know who they were and how they lived." Nevertheless, under the law, certain rights still had to be restored, including recording Jacob in family records as a lawful heir, even though he accepted no material assets. This was necessary to ensure he would not be treated as an outsider in any future legal proceedings involving the Ward family history. Alongside the legal procedures, the psychological impact on the family became a central focus of support. Emily, though overjoyed at finding her brother, still experienced emotional shock when she realized that 53 years of separation could not be bridged by a single reunion. A Missouri PD counselor noted that Emily showed signs of joy mixed with grief, a common reaction in long-term reunions where family members simultaneously feel happiness at recovery and pain over lost time. Emily regularly attended counseling sessions to learn how to manage expectations and avoid unintentionally pressuring Jacob to reclaim a past that neither of them still possessed. Meanwhile, extended family members who had grown up hearing about Jacob only as a loss also needed time to process the reality that the little brother or cousin who had existed only in old photographs was now a living person standing in front of them. Some struggled to balance excitement with initial strangeness because Jacob, raised as Michael Turner, was a grown man with his own separate life and no childhood memories tied to the family. Counselors guided the family to rebuild emotional connections step by step, based on the present rather than the past. They held regular meetings, shared stories about Jacob's parents and Emily's childhood, and gradually told him about the Ward family in a non-demanding way. Jacob, for his part, also had to adapt to a family he belonged to biologically, but that felt completely new emotionally. He attended private counseling sessions to work through feelings of identity rupture, learning to accept that he did not have to become the 1972 Jacob again. He could continue living as Michael, but now with the truth of his origins. The most important thing was helping the entire family understand that reunion was not the instant return of an old member, but the beginning of a new relationship built on truth, respect, and time. The long-term impact on the Ward family was not only the joy of recovery, but a journey of healing, one that required both legal and emotional structures to be readjusted after 53 years of interruption. Jacob's return started a new chapter for the family, but for that chapter to become a stable part of everyone's lives, they needed to rebuild slowly, patiently, and with the necessary professional support. The discovery of Jacob Ward after 53 years did not merely change one family's life. It created ripple effects across the legal system, investigative science, and society's view of long-term missing person cases. When Missouri PD, Kansas PD, and the FBI jointly reviewed the entire case-breaking process, they realized that success in the Jacob case came not only from genetic genealogy, but from the combination of three factors: long-term physical evidence retention, digitization of cold case files, and modern behavioral analysis based on criminal profiling. A series of changes followed, starting at the state level. Missouri updated its mandatory protocol so that every child missing case from 1950 onward must undergo periodic DNA review every 10 years, ensuring old samples are not overlooked as technology advances. The Cold Case Unit also expanded its digital mapping system to reconstruct suspect travel timelines in unsolved cases, the same way Detective Whitaker had rebuilt Harold Jennings' route. Neighboring states like Arkansas and Oklahoma quickly adopted the model, realizing that files once considered unsolvable simply needed the right tools to become clear. Additionally, the Jacob Ward case dramatically accelerated the use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. Although the technology had previously been used mainly for personal ancestry, law enforcement agencies now officially added it to their core toolkit. After congressional hearings in several states addressed privacy concerns, new regulations were issued to allow genetic genealogy in missing person and serious crime cases without violating privacy rights. Commercial DNA companies such as 23andMe and Ancestry DNA updated their terms of service to let users opt in to assisting cold case investigations if they wished. This shift stemmed from a simple fact: if Michael Turner had not voluntarily submitted his DNA to a public database, the Jacob case might still be unsolved. Notably, the FBI incorporated genetic genealogy into its standard protocol for pre-1990 missing person cases, especially in the Midwest, where dozens of similar cases remain open. Experts predict that within the next decade, this technology could resolve many cold cases previously deemed hopeless. DNA was not the only game changer. The Jacob case also forced law enforcement to rethink long-term evidence storage. When Whitaker recovered a hair from Jennings' old motel room and matched it to Jacob, that result came directly from the 1972 lab's decision to preserve samples, even though no one then knew DNA analysis would exist decades later. This proved the critical importance of stable, decades-long evidence storage. After the Jacob case, Missouri issued new guidelines requiring all evidence related to missing children to be retained indefinitely instead of the previous 25-year limit. Moreover, evidence was no longer labeled worthless if it could not be analyzed with contemporary technology. Instead, it was classified as samples awaiting future technology. The Federal Department of Justice also recommended that states invest in low-temperature evidence preservation systems to prevent DNA degradation over time. From state to federal levels, post-Jacob Ward forensic conferences repeatedly emphasized one key lesson: cold case investigation is not just looking backward, it is preparing for the future. The case proved that today's technology can solve yesterday's mysteries, and tomorrow's technology can solve the cases we cannot crack today. Furthermore, the societal impact was evident in how communities now view missing children. Many nonprofit organizations launched the No Case is Too Old campaign to encourage families to upload DNA and increase the chances of finding lost relatives. The success of the Jacob Ward case became living proof that reunion is possible across decades, giving the public faith that even after 30, 40, or 50 years there is still hope. Legally, lawmakers in Missouri, Kansas, and Arkansas proposed improvements to missing person alert systems by integrating data across states instead of operating in silos as before. Some states even proposed creating a federal database for child disappearances from 1950, 1990, to enable broader DNA matching and prevent situations where a victim lives in one state, but the missing person file exists only in another. Ultimately, the Jacob Ward case paved the way for a new mindset in investigative science. Cold case files are resources, not burdens. Every piece of old evidence has potential value when viewed through the lens of modern science. The Jacob case is not just the story of a little boy found after 53 years, it is a reminder that justice can arrive late, but it does not have to be lost forever, as long as people and technology keep moving forward. When all legal, scientific, and administrative conclusions had been finalized, the Jacob Ward case file was officially classified solved by the Missouri State Police, closed, after 53 years since the day the 3-year-old boy vanished from his family's yard in Springfield. This was one of the longest-running missing person cases in Missouri history to be cracked, thanks to the combination of genetic genealogy, behavioral analysis, and the digitization of decades-old physical evidence. Yet even though the investigation is now closed, many critical questions remain unanswered. The cold case unit's conclusion confirms that Harold Jennings was the man who abducted Jacob and took him across state lines into Kansas. However, Jennings died of heart disease in 1997, years before the case was reopened. As a result, he could never be prosecuted, nor interrogated to clarify his true motive or to confirm whether he was involved in any additional child abductions. Jennings' criminal profile, a drifter who moved frequently across states, repeatedly suspected but never arrested, leads investigators to believe the Jacob Ward abduction may not have been an isolated act. But with Jennings long dead, the mysteries surrounding his behavior and any possible network he belonged to remain limited to speculative analysis and behavioral pattern matching. The FBI's final report under the Midwest Child Abduction Review Project notes that at least 8 other disappearances between 1965 and 1975 share striking similarities with Jacob's case. Children vanishing within minutes, no signs of forced entry, and a suspect described as a middle-aged man driving a faded pickup truck. 3 of those 8 cases have notable geographic overlaps with places Jennings is known to have been, but due to lack of physical evidence and the death of the suspect, they remain classified as unresolved, possible link. This highlights a harsh reality. While one family finally has closure, many others continue to live with decades-long voids and may never receive final answers. The Jacob Ward case has therefore become the catalyst for the Missouri State Police to propose a comprehensive review of all missing persons files from the 1950-1990 period, prioritizing cases with suspect or vehicle descriptions similar to Jennings. The proposal has been submitted to the State Policy Division, accompanied by a recommendation that every piece of evidence never previously tested for DNA be cataloged and uploaded into a shared national repository for future technological advances. Another recommendation calls for expanded interstate data sharing agreements, especially among states along the routes Jennings is known to have traveled. Finally, the Cold Case Unit has requested mandatory training for investigators in timeline analysis, behavioral modeling, and the use of genetic genealogy databases in long-term missing persons cases. Even though Jennings can no longer be held accountable, the Jacob Ward file closes with a clear finding: the boy was taken by a lone stranger, not by family or anyone known to him, and the abduction had nothing to do with any internal family issues. A suspicion the Ward family endured for decades amid community gossip. That truth brings them not only vindication but long overdue peace. After the reunion, the Ward family has spent considerable time rebuilding the connection that was stolen from them. Emily and Jacob now see each other regularly, sometimes in Springfield, the town once shrouded in painful memories, sometimes in Wichita, where Jacob spent most of his life. Emily took Jacob to visit the lot where the old Ward house once stood, now under different ownership. Jacob stood silently in the former yard, feeling the quiet of a place he once belonged to, but no longer remembers. This was not a return of memory, but a return of truth. A truth Jacob is learning to embrace little by little. For Jacob himself, the process of reintegration continues. He is slowly growing comfortable carrying 2 names: Jacob on official documents and Michael in everyday life. He still works in Kansas, but now spends much more time learning about his birth family, rereading his parents' old letters, and looking through the childhood photos Emily preserved. Therapy sessions are helping him accept that having no memories of his original family does not make him any less bonded to them, and that he has every right to build a new relationship rooted in the present. Another bright spot is that the Ward family has broadened their outreach to the community, participating in programs that support families of missing persons. Emily has become a speaker at several National Center for Missing and Exploited Children (NCMEC) events, sharing the story of finding her brother to encourage those still waiting. Jacob occasionally attends private support group meetings for survivors, not to speak publicly about his own experience, but to listen to others walking a similar path. When the official case file was closed, Missouri PD added a simple line to the summary document. Jacob Ward, found alive, 2011. And beneath it, one symbolic sentence, case closed, but lessons ongoing. In the lives of Jacob and the Ward family, the crime itself has been solved. But questions remain open. Did Jennings abduct other children? Will the families still waiting ever find their loved ones the way the Wards did? And can future technology provide more answers for mysteries that have slept for decades? Yet right now, in a calmer present, the Ward family, no longer whole as it was in 1972, finally has something to hold on to. Jacob is alive, and they found each other before it was too late. The story of Jacob Ward, the child abducted in 1972 and found alive after 53 years, is a profound reflection of contemporary American life, where technology, law, and community are transforming how we protect children, process loss, and pursue truth. The fact that genetic genealogy identified Jacob demonstrates the power of modern science and reminds us that even mysteries once thought unsolvable can still be resolved if society keeps investing in technology and refuses to abandon faith in justice. The detail that Jacob lived for decades as Michael Turner, without knowing his past, offers a sobering insight. Many adults carry childhood trauma whose origins they never understood, and discovering the truth can be the first step toward healing. The Ward's persistence, especially Emily's, stands as proof of the strength of hope in American culture. Despite suspicion and being forgotten, they never stopped updating the file, preserving memories, and believing Jacob was still alive. The practical lesson is clear. The system only works when the community refuses to give up. It was Emily uploading her DNA, Missouri PD preserving evidence, and Michael taking a consumer test that created the chain of events leading to the truth. The case also serves as a warning to American families about the importance of child safety, recognizing risks in the community, and never dismissing unusual signs like the faded green pickup truck Springfield once ignored. Ultimately, Jacob's story teaches a deeper lesson. We never know the future value of what we preserve today, a lock of hair, an old file, or a crucial memory, until tomorrow's technology needs it. That is both a reminder of responsibility and a message of hope for every family still waiting for answers. Thank you for joining us on this 53-year journey to uncover the truth. If Jacob's story touched you, please subscribe to the channel to keep following cold cases solved through technology and unrelenting perseverance. See you in the next video, where every story reminds us that hope never disappears.